Okay, hello everyone. Let me. The lighting in my room is going crazy right now. The second I started the stream, I'm guessing this uses a lot of power, but it won't use that much power, anyways. Um. So what I'm gonna be doing is, let me move this over here because I'll be using this to read the chat if there are any questions or whatever. Yeah, you might be confused about about what's going on. Um, yeah, so basically, for the past, I don't know, I think like since Friday, um, I've been working on gathering notes for my next free will discussion, which is going to be about the nature of emergence. Um, and while I was so basically, I had an idea for where I wanted to go with this originally, um, and but then I came across some concepts that made me go, wait a second, do I actually understand this as well as I thought I do? And I already understood the concept of emergence, or at least I thought I did. Um, but then I learned about the distinction between weak emergence and strong emergence, which is a very valid idea, a valid distinction to make, because the idea of weak emergence, um, and I'm using this platform to kind of articulate my thoughts. So sorry if this is kind of like half baked because I'm still learning about it. But basically, the idea of weak emergence is that if you have some kind of fundamental particle, um, or a set of theories that explain how particles interact, um, that set of rules will govern how particles interact, but then give rise to new structures, new kind of um, novel behavior, let's say. So, like, let's just say a good example would be to consider like the most fundamental particles, quarks, and then think about how all of those quarks. So let's think about how a proton is comprised of three quarks. Maybe I should like start doing stuff to make this more interesting. So a proton, um, yeah, is comprised of three quarks. Um, and the idea in weak emergence is that we can have a set of equations that explains how weak quarks interact with each other. Sorry, not weak quarks. These are specifically up quarks and down quarks. So two up quarks and a down quark go to make a proton. Okay, so we can have a theory of physics that describes how these fundamental particles interact, and then, excuse me, and then by looking at that, we can see how a new phenomenon, a new emergent phenomenon can occur, that being a proton. So you have these fundamental constituents, and then given some set of principles governing how they interact with each other, a new thing can happen, which is the existence of a proton. What I find interesting about this example is that there's a question about whether this really shows reductionism, because funny enough, you can take the mass of this up quark, and of this down quark and add them together, and you won't get the mass of the proton. That's because the mass of the proton isn't just made up of its constituent parts, which kind of, in my opinion, pokes a small hole in reductionism, not a massive hole, but a small hole in reductionism, because the idea of reductionism is that you can just use fundamental particles and build your way up to every possible structure that exists in the universe. But this kind of shows that you can't really necessarily do that, because once you cause these constituent parts to interact in a specific way, they have this new property. They have this additional mass that you need to consider. And of course, you can understand how that mass arises from smaller through these dynamics that occur between these constituent particles, which shows that the mass itself is an emergent phenomenon from the way they interact and the way they're composed. Excuse me while I take a sip of my cola. Okay, so anyways, what I've been doing is trying to study the difference between strong and weak emergence. So this proton might be an example of weak emergence. Again, interesting things are happening, but you can still understand it, still fundamentally understand it as a weakly emergent phenomenon. Let me just quickly check my chat here in case anybody's speaking. If you guys can hear me, let me know. If you guys could give whatever input you want, I'd like to hear it. But anyways, the question is, are there any strongly emergent phenomenon? Now, a strongly emergent phenomenon is a novel phenomenon, something new that exists in the universe. Think of life, for instance. Think of computers, for instance. Something like that, which you can't actually derive from the most fundamental laws. So the most fundamental laws, for some reason or another, will not give you an adequate prediction to explain this higher level thing. In my opinion, well, it's hard to. So the question is, does strong emergence exist, or is it just theoretical? The first thing is that it is theoretical, and it's theoretically consistent. So it's possible to create systems that are strongly emergent and that we know are definitely strongly emergent. And so in theory, it's possible. The question is, does it really exist? And what I've been looking at is, and how this relates to free will is that if free will does exist, it has to be a strongly emergent phenomenon. Because it's weakly emergent, it's pretty much just governed by the deterministic laws that govern the rest of matter in the universe. Like a person is just these laws playing themselves out. And therefore, nothing that a person does is actually, let's say, in a sense, unpredictable by those laws, especially if those laws just playing themselves out. But in a sense, we're positing is that consciousness and sentience and free will specifically. So free will itself is something that what I'm going to be calling an emergent phenomenon. Free will as an emergent phenomenon is capable of kind of escaping the destiny that's imposed upon us by the rules of the material world, if that makes sense. It's something that kind of, in a weird sense, kind of breaks the laws of physics. Not exactly breaks them, but kind of has this ability to utilize the laws of physics in a very special and dynamic way, which is indicative of free will. So that's going to be like the thesis of what I'm studying. But today I want to look at the evidence and the kind of notes that I've taken on some papers that I've read, which are really freaking fascinating. Extremely so. The things I've learned while looking at these papers have been incredible. And so this stream is an attempt to just kind of consolidate some of those ideas and just talk about them and just read the things that I've read. And I'm doing it on stream rather than on private to give myself some more motivation, because if people want to interact and like give their thoughts, that would be nice. And yeah, I'll just go for as long as I don't feel tired, but I'll try to go as much as I can because it's really interesting. And also I kind of want to do it while I'm tired, because being tired might activate a certain state of mind, which might be conducive for understanding this. Okay, so where do we begin? So this paper that I read, Strong Emergence in Biological Systems, is open to mathematical reasoning, or is it open to mathematical reasoning? And this just pretty much proves a mathematical way to express strong emergence. But there were some interesting things about this paper because they define strong emergence slightly differently, but not in a way that's inconsistent with other let's say additions to strong emergence. Because they consider, so let me read this, about the emergence of proteins. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly which notes are mine. I mean, I'll be able to tell. About the emergence of proteins, there's an algorithm for weak emergence and one for strong emergence. Irreducibility is considered a necessary and sufficient criterion for strong biological emergence. Irreducibility, the property of irreducibility, means simply that in order to get a brand new property out of an object, there's like a fundamental component. And without that component, you just won't get that property. Okay? And this is going to be in the context of proteins. I mean, I hope you guys are familiar with the idea of proteins, but I can explain it if there are any questions. But basically, every like kind of function in our body at the biochemical level is played by a protein. Basically, proteins are like involved in constructing our bodies and maintaining our bodies and very important things. And basically, a protein just composed of a very long chain of amino acids. And so what this paper is going to show is that there's a property of a protein. I think it's pyruvate kinase, and we'll get into that. It's very interesting stuff, actually. So don't even worry if you're not familiar with it. I'm happy to explain further if anybody's unfamiliar with the any kind of like part of this. Let me just keep reading. Here, strong emergence will be understood in such a way that a certain set of elements assembles to form a completely new property or function of a system, which is lost upon removal of one of these elements, usually termed irreducibility. This is in accordance, example, with Noble 2012 and complies with Lorentz fulguration concept, Lorentz 1973. Oh, I need to read that. If that's the same Lorentz that, would he still even be alive by then? Maybe a different Lorentz. I'll look into it later. But deviates from Chalmers' understanding of strong emergence. Okay, so the reason it deviates is because this isn't claiming that you can't predict the emergent phenomenon using lower level laws, because it could simply be a matter of computational inefficiency. So what this means is that if you try to make a model of protein folding in a computer, okay, and you go ahead and run it, you're going to get the wrong answer, because protein folding is a very complicated problem. Remains today a very complicated problem. And I think it's currently unsolved still. But here are some papers that provide massive insight into how a solution could be found. Basically, the reason so there could be a couple of problems with trying to simulate proteins. Let me just take a sip of my drink. The problems are that either like the system of a protein is so complicated that our computers can't like match all of those kind of little factors and then compute an accurate simulation. Like it's just too computationally intense, and we just need stronger computers with more energy and more memory. Or this is a case of strong emergence, or this is a case of emergence in general. And what that basically means in the Chalmers sense, so we just read that Chalmers explained strong emergence differently, is that like there's a brand new property that can't be predicted by the lower laws. So it could be one or the other. They can't rule out in this paper. They can't rule out that it's the kind of unpredictable. I'll just call that the unpredictability element, even though it's not really unpredictability per se, but there's a kind of unpredictability being implied in strong emergence. So that category hasn't been ruled out, but they have shown that irreducibility is a fundamental component, which is very, very interesting and very intriguing. And I should really try to factor that in as much as I can, that irreducibility is a fundamental component. Because maybe that shows, for example, in the case of free will, that if we're missing one particular thing, we just won't have free will in general. And so we got to look out for a possibility, because this implies that there's a possibility of such an element. Again, if none of this is making sense, that's fine. There's a lot to say. And let me just keep reading, because I think I'm having a bunch of people viewing. If there's any questions, let me know. And I'll try my best to answer them. But it might be hard to juggle a bunch of things at once. Okay, so in this paper, they created mathematical tools which treat weak and strong emergence quantitatively. So they create a mathematical model for weak emergence, which is pretty well understood, and then for strong emergence as well. This is very interesting that you can create mathematical models for strong emergence. It shows that strong emergence is a valid concept. There are ways to do it. And I've looked at papers that show computationally and mathematically how to get strong emergence. The question is, does this really exist in nature? And the answer to me so far is obviously yes. Like it's very hard to imagine certain things like consciousness and sentience without strong emergence. And if something is claimed to be weak emergence, it should be fairly easy to prove it. And so the harder you try to prove it, and the more, let's say, difficult it is to prove as weak emergence, the more likely it is a phenomenon of strong emergence. And there are also very well-defined real-world examples of strong emergence, particularly in transistors and semiconductors. And I'll explain that soon. So for strong emergence, a separate mathematical approach was introduced, implying that a set of n so-called constitutive proteins at concentrations exceeding individual threshold values are required to spontaneously form a new complex trait. So exceeding this. So you can imagine here. there's this complex trait, and either the protein doesn't have it or it does have it. And what this shows is that it's only when all of these constituent amino acids, all of these constituent amino acids are at a very specific concentration, then, then this new trait emerges. Okay? So it goes from a state of 0 to 1. And so it's only when every single, and it's showing 3 amino acids here, but really, I think these are amino acids. Or no, there might be like parts of the enzyme, pyruvate kinase. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. But imagine if these were amino acids, because it's the same thing. This would not just be like one amino acid, and it wouldn't be just 3 amino acids. It would be like thousands. So the system can get very complicated. I see that there's a comment. I missed the beginning. What's the difference between strong and weak? Yeah, okay, let me reiterate this again. So weak emergence is basically I don't know where to start. Okay, so just like imagine like the most fundamental theory of physics we have, like the most like basic units of matter and like the theory that describes them. So something like this, like the standard model of particle physics. So using those rules, you can construct new phenomenon that are completely consistent with those rules and predictable based on those rules. So you can see how those little small rules will give rise to a new phenomenon, even though the phenomenon itself is like very interesting and not like, you wouldn't necessarily think it's implied by those rules, but it is. Like you can show that those rules are consistent with that phenomenon. Strong emergence, on the other hand, is when a new phenomenon starts to exist. And so there's a bunch of criteria that kind of take place as a consequence of strong emergence. The first thing is that you can't actually use those fundamental rules to derive that principle. Those fundamental rules, even in principle, will not get you to explaining that phenomenon. There's kind of a jump. Now, there's other kind of things that are true that are consequent of this. That strongly emergent phenomenon can then kind of alter the rules, the fundamental rules at the smallest scales. So there's this kind of downwards motion. I don't know if I'm making sense, but like, okay, so let's imagine that consciousness is a strongly emergent phenomenon. Okay, so imagine that consciousness is strongly emergent. Consciousness itself can have a downward effect on matter and kind of alter the rules slightly so that there's a consistent version of those rules that exists with that strongly emergent probability. So consciousness itself rises up out of matter and then kind of has this downward influence upon matter. It's like this circular relationship between them. Strong is irreducible and chaotic. Irreducible in the sense that's like kind of laid out in this paper, yeah. If that's what you mean. Chaotic, not exactly. Not exactly chaotic. It's complicated. It's like somewhere between chaotic and non-chaotic. You'll see how that is. It's very cool because like one of the things that I hear Sam here saying is like either the universe is fully deterministic or it's random, or it's a combination of random and deterministic, and in no case do you have free will. Well, actually, no. In the second case, you can have free will. You can show mechanistically that there's a way to use randomness and determinism together to have free will. Sounds like gene culture coevolution. Oh man, if you stick around for what I'm going to show you later, you're going to be very intrigued. This is extremely fascinating. And exactly what you're talking about. Okay. So so basically all this paper did was show that the irreducibility concept. Now it also said that weak and strong emergence are not mutually exclusive phenomenon. So interestingly, it's possible that a bunch of different weakly emergent phenomenon can act together and work together to give rise to strong emergence. So it seems like weak emergence is like a condition for strong emergence. Very interesting, actually. It's similar to the relationship of how sentience is a condition for consciousness. At least I think. Like somebody once told me to posit like consciousness that exists without sentience, and I was like, what the hell even would that be? but it seems like sentience is needed for consciousness to exist. And so like in the same way that like consciousness is embedded within sentience, strong emergence is embedded within weak emergence. So a bunch of weakly emergent phenomenon can give rise to a strongly emergent phenomenon. And there's very interesting implications as a consequence of this. It's mind-boggling. This is one of the most fascinating topics I've like come across, and I'm very like excited to like share with you guys what I found. Okay, so a different study, I think this was what to say, put forward. So there might be a bit of different study in there forward. A quantitative description of strong emergence. I made this note for myself to go back to this paper. And then check what this description was. By the way, that's what this is. These are like my notes I make for videos and research and all sorts of stuff, including time wasting, which I just put whatever videos I want to watch when I'm wasting time, so that I organize my time wasting time better. Okay, we may hypothesize tentatively that life started rather with traits organized in a modular or weakly emergent way, allowing stepwise evolution. Once a critical protein infrastructure had been established, strongly emergent traits could have formed spontaneously by recruiting sets of proteins to conquer new functions. So like so they talk about pyruvate kinase. So there's a bunch of things that are interesting here. For one, it shows that pyruvate kinase and this protein and what it does is a strongly emergent phenomenon. It exists. It's real. It's not just a theoretical mathematical construct. It's a very real phenomenon, and it occurs at very small scales. And if it occurs at very small scales, like the idea here isn't that like strong emergence is something that happens once. Like this is strong emergent. This protein is strongly emergent. But then there are even more strongly emergent phenomenon relative to that, like life itself, like a cell itself, like a body itself. A body itself is like this crazy, like next level emergent phenomenon that arises out of these other strongly emergent phenomenon. So it's like strong built upon strong built upon strong, with some phenomenon being stronger than others. But of course, and again, weak emergence still does exist as well. So the weak emergence gives rise to strong emergence, which gives rise to even stronger emergence. And it's crazy, and it's next level. Like the implications of it are just like crazy and next level. So this is pretty much in the context of proteins. Now so I'm going to move on to this paper. This paper is very interesting and very hard to read. I took notes that I have in front of me. Let me see if these are going to be relevant. I might read these out loud to give more context to what's going on, but basically what happens in this paper, let me just read the abstract. The causal efficacy of a material system is usually thought to be produced by the law-like actions and interactions of its constituents. Here, a specific system is constructed and explained that produces a cause that cannot be understood in this way, but instead has novel and autonomous efficacy. So hold on, he's saying that like he shows that there's a way to create this thing that has an effect upon this system that exists within the system, but is also like not being caused by its constituents. Like it arises somehow like in a different manner than just adding up the constituents. The construction establishes a proof of feasibility of strong emergence. The system works by utilizing randomness in a targeted and cyclical way, and by relying on sustained evolution by natural selection. I'll pause there for a second because exactly this pretty much shows that evolution itself, like the process of evolution of Darwinian natural selection, is an emergent phenomenon. It's a strongly emergent phenomenon in and of itself. And that might sound confusing because, okay, well, it sounded confusing to me for a second. I'll want me to speak for myself rather than assuming what you guys are thinking. The reason that sounded confusing to me is because it feels like natural selection is just a concept that humans invent to explain what's happening out there in the real world. And that's not exactly the case. There is a phenomenon called natural selection that's happening in the real world, and we can create the concept to describe it. And so there's a sense in which the concept really does exist at like different epistemological levels. And so evolution, the really existing evolution, is a process which is strongly emergent. You can't actually predict the way a species evolves using just the laws of physics alone. It's not possible. It gives rise, that kind of organization gives rise to something else which is strongly emergent. And like it's kind of hard to explain how strongly emergent things exist without like going into some examples. So let's continue with this. So this model is not vulnerable to standard arguments against strong emergence, in particular ones that assume that the physical reality is causally closed. Um, yeah, I can just elaborate on that, but it's better if I just read it. Moreover, it does not suffer from epiphenomenalism or causal overdetermination. Again, like this is such a like key insight, because this is a big objection to strong emergence, because it just causes overdeterminism. Um, but you can show that it won't suffer from causal determinism. The system uses only standard material components and processes and is fully consistent with naturalism. It is discussed whether the emergent cause can still be viewed as material in the way that it is commonly understood. That's a nice teaser, because it gives a kind of sense of what emergent phenomena are, because they exist kind of like they arise out of the material world, but then start to live in existence apart from it, and then have this downward influence upon the material world. And like that's exactly how I attempt to capture free will. Free will is a result of our sentience, which is this thing that kind of rises above the physical world. It's caused by the physical world, but then it rises above it to have this downward influence upon the physical world. And that's what it feels like to be conscious, that like you can see the world and like create a representation of the world inside your own head. Okay, so let me continue. So yeah, I wrote a note for myself. No overdetermination shows that such systems might exist. It shows that an autonomous cause can emerge from a realizable system that is purely material. The construction depends on a subtle interaction of deterministic and random processes. So this is like, so what's going on here? Let me create an analogy for our case, because I'm very interested in free will as a psychic phenomenon. So let's create a psychic analog of what's being described here. So imagine that your brain involves both deliberate processes and random processes. Random processes that you can't control, or that you can't seemingly control, because I should add a caveat. So an example of this would be like, for example, you go to sleep and then you have all these crazy dreams. You didn't like direct the direction of your dreams. It's kind of just like this spontaneous imaginative space or state where your brain is just kind of conjuring up images, like all sorts of images, crazy fantastical notions. But imagine like it comes up with something useful just by chance, like some kind of new invention, or like some kind of insight about yourself, or some kind of let's say insight about the world that's really useful to know and to think about. So your brain kind of engaged in this process of randomness to randomly generate ideas, and then you, as a person, as an ego, can seize upon those ideas. So there's this combination of determinism, as in you're determining, your ego is determining the course of your actions, and randomness, this random thing that happened inside your brain that you didn't have any control over, or that your ego didn't have any control over. So there's ways to kind of mix randomness and causal determinism in such a way that you get this new behavior that isn't exactly deterministic, but it isn't exactly random either. It's very cool. It's what's called undecidable, but undecidable in a very cool context, which is the real world. And so whenever you hear people say that free will can't exist because either the universe is random or the universe is determined, well, actually, because the universe is both random and determined, it's possible for something like free will to exist utilizing both random and determined processes. And you can show that this entity that arises as a result of this is a strongly emergent entity. And yeah, so the construction can be fully realized. Now, remember, this is still a theoretical construction, but you're going to quickly see that, like, clearly this can exist in real life, and probably already does exist in real life. It's he creates it just with a theoretical model, but you can clearly see that this model applies to life, like in general, like just like even bacteria, this model would apply to them specifically. It applies less to us as living things because of the way we reproduce. But you can show that kind of like modifying some of these processes to change this to a random rate of behavior will give you a model of what it feels like to be a person, and why that feeling might be a strongly emergent phenomenon. So, okay, let me just start with this quote again. The construction can be fully realized with components at the level of chemistry and basic cellular physiology. Actions and interactions at these levels have been studied extensively, and there is little doubt about the reality of the entities involved, such as molecules and biological cells. The construction stays away from lower and higher levels with a more uncertain ontology, such as fundamental physics, where the ontological interpretation of quantum physics is uncertain. Let me read that again, because I was kind of dozing off. The construction thus stays away from lower and higher levels with a more uncertain ontology, such as fundamental physics, where the ontological interpretation of quantum physics is uncertain. Yeah, okay. I should kind of explain this, because this is a good insight. Basically, the how do I put this? Ontological. So basically, like when you construct a system out of deterministic parts, you don't have to start at the lowest level of physics. You can just create a system. Like, for example, what's a good example? Like if you had an equation describing temperature. Temperature is not like a fundamental property of particles. It's like a statistical property that rises up. So you can just kind of like start with the existence of temperature and then be like, okay, at this temperature water boils, at this temperature water freezes, at this temperature water is a liquid. So you created this model, and you can use the kind of predictions of that model to construct new possible truths or new phenomenon that are either strongly emergent or weakly emergent relative to that system. If that makes sense. So like, you don't have to go to the very lowest levels of physics. As long as you have a valid mathematical construction of a system, you can use that system as your kind of, let's say, starting point. And like, yeah, this gets into math and like axioms and like how math works, and I'll describe that as well. And I may come back to describing this. Okay, I got a comment. Doesn't Jung's idea of synchronicity involve events that are non-causal but meaningful? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Very much so. To put it simply. Okay. Yeah. So the main point here is to show yeah, the ontological status of mental phenomena is uncertain. Yeah. See, that's like, these are good points as well, because like we need to solve these problems before we can even start to use the very fundamental rules to figure out, for example, like how human behavior works. Like, is anybody here convinced that like you can genuinely model human behavior by reducing to the like just by like understanding the fundamental particles? I don't think so. And I feel like intuitively we know that, but it's kind of hard to prove until you're aware of the phenomenon of strong emergence. And you should be aware of it, because it explains why reality is so bizarre. Like orders of magnitudes more complicated than like people can really understand. Like, it explains why reality is so strange. If a strong emergence is real, it's perfectly consistent with like the utter perplexity of existence, and just how complicated it is. Yeah, so the main point here is to show that well understood entities can be combined in such a way that an ontologically novel entity emerges and has novel causal efficacy. The article shows an example of strong emergence and shows why it is strongly emergent. I meant to write emergent here. No proof that it actually exists in nature, but living systems are way more complex than this. Okay. I wrote no proof that this exists in nature, but I think I meant more like that this theoretical construction is like a one-to-one mapping between natural phenomenon and this model. But it does like I think like, having understood this better, I think I do agree now that this definitely exists, because basically what this is showing is, imagine a system. Okay, can you guys see my mouse? Not exactly, huh? Or maybe I can't. Okay, so just see this S right here, which represents system. Think of it as just like a cell, or just like any kind of living organism. Okay, and it's fit. Okay, like it has a certain fitness relative to its environment. So its environment influences its own fitness. Okay, and its fitness is basically just a measure of how like likely it is to reproduce. Okay, so a good example is like, imagine you're an animal adapted for deserts, and then like imagine you were just suddenly plucked from that environment and put into like the coldest, like snowiest environment ever, or like a super hyper tropical environment, like something you're just not adapted to. That like the fact that you're not adapted to that environment means that your fitness will be lower. Okay. So that's basically what it is. It just has a fitness relative to its environment. Now, it can alter its fitness, right? So there's this kind of slow change of attempting to become fit relative to the environment. So like an animal that's just thrown into a tropical environment, all of a sudden, it thinks to itself, I'm not fit for this environment. I need to get out of here. So I need to start traveling to where like I'm better suited. And so it can start to move. So it can kind of start to attempt to alter its fitness itself. A very key thing here is the fact that the organism can refer to itself and think of itself relative to its environment. It can have like this matching function of like checking like I'm a specific way, my body's a specific configuration, and the way my body is configured is not compatible with my environment as it currently stands. I need to move. I need to get out of here. So it can kind of activate this process of getting out of here. One second, I'm gonna turn off my camera because I have it on even though I'm not using it. Can I just delete it? Okay, whatever. If it starts to get energy intensive, I'll turn it off. Armin Coleman, awesome. Thanks for the feedback. And it's nice to see you as well. Okay, so let me. Is this your master's thesis? Like there's definitely enough content here for it to be a master's thesis, somebody's master's thesis. But for me personally, this is just the kind of thing I do for fun. That's what I do. I do a master's thesis amount of work for like topics that I just throw on YouTube for fun. I'm like a rogue scholar. Okay, anyways, let me get to this. Okay, so we're gonna ignore this C for now. Let's consider this process. So within system X, there's some kind of internal process X, okay? And this internal process X, what it's gonna do is it basically just influences the rate of random change. Okay, so you can think of this as either being a behavioral change, so like a rate of random change behaviorally. So like a rabbit now that's in like, okay, I was thinking of a rabbit, like a desert adapted rabbit that's in a tropical forest. Like it's gonna start doing things that it doesn't normally do. It assesses its fitness and it's like, okay, I'm gonna start like getting out of here. So it starts like altering its behavior, and like that alteration process can be kind of random, right? Like it just tries new things. Like it doesn't have to be deliberate. Like and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. Like it'll just try new things and see what works. Okay, so how does X influence the rate of random change? Oh, by the way, okay, I'll explain this in the context of some cellular organisms. They can influence their own DNA. Okay, so like imagine that a bacteria, there's certain types of cells. This doesn't apply to all bacteria, but there are cells that are like this, which is very fascinating. So imagine a cell that can sense its own fitness relative to its environment, and then it starts altering its own DNA because it's like, this environment does not fit with my fitness, so I need to start altering my own DNA to like get random mutations and then maybe produce something within myself that's more fit to this environment. Like, so for example, it goes into a new medium and then encounters this substance that it can't metabolize, and then it's like, okay, and then a process within it detects that and is like, okay, we need to start pumping out new proteins. So first, let's modify our own DNA and then start making new proteins and then see if these proteins can be used to metabolize this substance. Does that make sense? Got a new comment. 1 second. I love it. I can't wait to see your Elden Ring DLC playthrough stream. Yeah. I don't even know if I'll be able to. I mean, I want to play the DLC so badly, but so much stuff is taking my time. Okay, so let's get back to what I was saying. So yeah, you can imagine it in those two contexts, like either a cell or a living organism that alters its behavior. So this internal thing that exists within S, it produces an estimate of its own fitness X. Okay, so X is an attempt to estimate estimate the fitness of the organism. So it's pretty much exactly what I was just saying, that like it takes a guess, it looks around, it estimates its own fitness, and then it produces this number, okay? And this number will decrease if the fitness is low. So when the fitness is low, R is going to be large, okay? So its rate of random change is going to be high. When X is large, this means that the estimate is a good, the estimate of fitness is highly accurate, okay? So this highly accurate estimation of fitness means that the organism isn't going to change its behavior because like it's in a good environment. So there's no need to change, right? Like you just do what you're doing because you're in a good environment, and if you just do what you do, you're probably going to survive. And so this reduces the rate of random mutations, and this also has the consequence of these evolutionarily advantageous traits perpetuating to the next generation. So that kind of like this shows again like how evolution, because this is exactly what evolution is right here. This is just a cool like interesting model of evolution. I'm referring to figure 1, by the way, here. Evolution itself is a strongly emergent phenomenon. Why is it strongly emergent? Because you have this thing C here, okay? C is just an imagine it as like a numerical estimate of how well this X over here fitness estimate estimates its own fitness, okay? Because if the estimate is very good, it means that the organism can start to do random things when its fitness is bad relative to its environment, or it can do the same thing if its fitness is good relative to the environment. So if this estimate is stronger, the organism has a much better chance of living. And of course, evolution will tend to produce organisms that have a good estimate of their own fitness. You can think of that in the context of your own psyche. Like, you can perceive your environment. So you can check around, look around and see, is this environment well suited to me? Is it not? Okay, we'll get out of that environment. So there's just like this combination of stochastic is just kind of like another word for random, stochastic and determined processes that gives you a strongly emergent phenomenon. Let me just take a sip of my cola because otherwise I won't have the brain energy to speak about this. Any questions, by the way? I see that a bunch of people were watching, and like I don't know, like at what point you joined this. But if there are any questions, let me know. But otherwise I'll just keep reading because I think that makes sense. Well, hold on. Let me talk a little bit more about not sarcastic, stochastic. The word will come up here, and you'll see it. Although sarcastic might be a good way to put it. Okay. So C is this causally emergent phenomenon. Okay. It increases fitness to B. So this higher thing that's emerged as a consequence of this process. So there's this process happening within an organism, and it creates like this kind of like concept, the concept of accuracy of fitness. And this accuracy of fitness concept somehow causes the organism to become more fit, or it has this increasing effect on the organism's fitness to be, which is like its ability to increase its fitness relative to its circumstances or relative to itself. So it's having a downward effect upon this like kind of higher emergent phenomenon is having this downward effect upon like what's normally considered like a normal evolutionary process, which is very interesting. And like what's going on here, because you can argue that this fitness estimate is just like a numerical construct that humans can use to characterize this phenomenon. But in a sense, the phenomenon does exist in nature because of the fact that it does exist. Organisms with this schematic, with this format, are more likely to survive and pass on their genes, as shown by simulations. He talks about some simulations that have shown this to be the case when organisms possess this internal structure. In this dynamic between stochastic and determined events. So let me continue reading, just so I know what to talk about. Actually, there is no erroneous mix-up of categories here, but this is exactly the kind of categorical uncertainty that is to be expected of strong emergence. Prior conceptions of categories cannot suffice because an entity with a novel causal power cannot appear just out of thin air. Novel causal power has to be acquired by something that is already there, even if this something is not yet a full-blown entity, such as C as a standard level of fit. Okay, so what this was in response to is that he was addressing the objection that this thing called C, which is an accuracy estimate of its own fitness, is just it's like a mental construct, right? It's just like a empirical tool for us to look at or to consider evolution. But he says that there is no erroneous mix-up of categories here. This isn't just like a mental construct. There's a sense in which it really exists as a causally, it's causing as something with causal agency. That's a good way to put it. It's this brand new thing called C has a emergently causal influence upon the organism's own evolution. And so there's a sense in which, because it's emergent, because it's this new thing, it doesn't have to belong to the categories of the smaller elements that make it up. It can just be a new thing, you know? And that is the nature of emergent phenomenon. They're brand new. They're not just constructions of matter. They're matter acting in specific ways to cause a brand new thing. Think of the concept of democracy, or the concept of law. These are just mental constructs, but they exist in the context of human existence. And so there's a sense in which they really exist. I just noticed I lost 3 viewers when I mentioned democracy. No, I get it. Okay. But the point is that we have these higher mental constructs that clearly do exist in some context, i.e. human existence. Humans are the things that invented the concept of democracy, and it does exist for us because it has causal influence on the way we organize our governments, for example, or the way we do things, the way we share power or fail to share power, whatever your take is. It's where do I go from here? It's just showing that there's this higher thing that can come into existence as a consequence of lower laws that exists outside of the category of those lower laws and has causal influence upon those lower laws. That's crazy. That's crazy. It's not just the fact that things that lower level entities can give rise to these higher phenomenon. These higher phenomenon can then go back and cause alterations in those lower level phenomenon, such that this lower level phenomenon can't be used to explain the higher level principles, because you now need a modified version of those lower level phenomenon, because that higher level thing has influenced it. And we're going to be talking about just an example of that if I get to it, because there's already quite a lot of material to get through. I might have to extend my stream quite a bit. Okay. So, hence, there is no dependence on humans or human epistemology when C evolves and acquires objective causal clout in the world. I'm interested. I'll ask a question to the audience if the audience is able to follow any of this, because you might be coming in at random times and be kind of missing context. But do you think that this is true? Do you think that this thing C here, which is an accuracy of an organism's own fitness, so imagine yourself and imagining how fit you are, how fit am I for my environment? If you're randomly transported to a country or to the wild, would you immediately be able to sense that I'm not fit for this environment, I need to find civilization soon? Yes, you can. And if your estimate of that is very accurate, you can influence your own evolution, and you can let's say, alter the universe in such a way that you wouldn't be able to predict it with prior hand knowledge. You're moving in this other direction that wasn't determined by lower level laws. And the key thing of that allows this, that enables this in this circumstance, and again, this is just this particular circumstance. There are other ways to construct strongly emergent phenomenon, but in this particular circumstance, what's allowing it is the fact that you're combining randomness with determination, with causal determinism, using these in a kind of special loop, and this special loop will give you a strongly emergent phenomenon. And I find that really cool. Again, it's not just determinism or just randomness that can give you a causally emergent phenomenon. It's the combination of both and using both of those phenomenon in a very creative way. So that's, again, this just shows that evolution by natural selection is a strongly emergent phenomenon. There's nothing you can do. You can't use the lower levels of existence to predict evolution. And that's kind of like obvious, right? Because like evolution depends on a lot of randomness. So like how are you going to account for that randomness within your deterministic models? And you might say that like it's just pseudo random. But that ignores that there are genuinely random phenomenon in existence. But I would even argue that just like relative randomness is a kind of concept, because there are things that are relative, that are random relative to the system that we're talking about, rather than being random to like the universe's laws. Okay, so where do I go from here? The proposed mechanism is non-deterministic because it utilizes randomness. When systems of the emergent kind, let me just, should I increase this for now? Yeah, okay. But good God, where did I go? Need to go back up here. Okay. Yeah, the proposed mechanism is non-deterministic because it utilizes randomness. When systems of the kind considered here are deterministic, any emergent causation may be classified as weak emergence. Okay, like simple enough, right? Like you use the deterministic laws that you have, and you can show that like if something brand new can be made from those laws, that it's weakly emergent. Okay. Such a classification also applies to most non-deterministic systems, that is, systems that combine determinism with randomness. Okay, so like, yeah, just because you're combining randomness doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get a strongly emergent phenomenon, but randomness usually does not contribute to novel causal powers. Thus, involving randomness is not by itself sufficient for producing strong emergence. Okay. However, the non-deterministic system explained here is of a rather special kind. It couples deterministic and random factors in a cyclical and sustained way, such that it is impossible to separate them and impossible to neglect the effects of randomness. The randomness is even indispensable. Excuse me. Because without the randomness, there would... this cola... the randomness is even indispensable, because without the randomness, there would be no effect on fitness to be, and C would not be a cause. Importantly, the specific way by which deterministic and random factors are coupled, i.e. by how X and R are related, tends to increase fitness. I'll just pause on that and think about that for a second, because I'm also learning this, by the way. I've taken notes on what I think to be are the most interesting points. But I did all this in the past couple of days, and this is my opportunity to kind of like go through my notes and try to understand them and explain them to you guys as best as I can, because I'm going to be making a video on this. Okay. Hello to my 7 viewers. If you guys have anything to say, anything to add, please feel free to do so. Yeah, okay. Therefore, the complementary causes produce neither epiphenomenalism nor causal overdetermination. Yeah, that's actually definitely the case. Like, just thinking about this, there's no way I can imagine causal overdetermination being here, because this accuracy fitness does increase its own fitness. So like it definitely does have a causal influence on the system, and it definitely exists outside a part of the system. The mechanism does not require or produce a dualism of the Cartesian type. Technically, no, but I would argue that not of the Cartesian type, but maybe of a different type, because Cartesian dualism is limited, and even the word dualism is limited, it should be like just considered like a new level, let's say, like a new like level of concepts that doesn't have the same rules as lower level concepts. One second, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I'll be back. This will just be a break. Hope you all heard my toilet flush. Okay, let's continue. Nevertheless, one might... what's preventing my chair from moving forward? Nevertheless, one might perhaps view it as letting some sort of dualism emerge from a physical monism. Again, I would respond to that by saying that, like, it's not necessarily dualism. Like, it's a relative dualism relative to the system itself, but it still, like, doesn't imply dualism in the sense that there's only two things. I think there's a lot of things. I think that what this is showing is that there's plenty of things. As opposed to just two things of mind and matter. We did. Thanks for letting me know. Okay. It is possible that in effect any constructed or inclusive system indeed contains indeterminacy and is thus non-deterministic, not fully deterministic. This is plausible because no system is completely isolated from the rest of the universe. Okay, hold on. What does it say? It is possible that, in effect, any constructed or inclusive system contains indeterminacy and is, thus, non-deterministic. And is thus non-deterministic. Not fully. It is possible because no system is completely isolated from the rest of the universe. Okay, I'm not sure what the significance of that is. However, the proposed system belongs to the realm of the basic matter-oriented natural sciences, in particular the ones that deal with complex material systems, such as occur, for example, in cellular physiology, neuroscience, and atmospheric science. Damn. However, the proposed system belongs to the realm of the basic matter-oriented natural sciences, in particular the ones that deal with complex material systems, such as occur, for example, in cellular physiology, neuroscience, and atmospheric science. I'm very interested to see the application of this. That's how you can see my mouse. The application of this particular atmospheric science to this model, or this particular model to atmospheric science. That's very interesting. Does that mean like some aspects of the atmosphere are strongly emergent? Again, now that I know about strong emergence, I wouldn't be surprised by that, but maybe you guys would be. I'm not saying, for example, I mean, like, I might be mistaken because I'm not saying, for example, that any strongly emergent phenomenon has free will. What I'm saying is free will in and of itself is a strongly emergent phenomenon arising out of other strongly emergent phenomenon. It's that complicated. It's a very complicated... this universe is very complicated. It's a very complicated way to understand reality, but once you wrap your mind around it, it's like super enlightening, I would say. I do feel enlightened studying all of this. Okay, so, however, the ontology of the emergent cause C as affecting fitness to be is different. One different from what? The process... Okay, so he's just explaining the ontology of the emergent cause C as affecting is different. Its causal power is autonomous in the sense that it is not fully defined by the causal powers of the constituents of the system and its environment. So that's exactly the key, right? Like, this is how you show that it's strongly emergent, is that it's not arising, it's not like this direct consequence of these smaller systems, it's this brand new thing that's influencing the lower systems. This is so... hold on, let me read that sentence again. Its causal power is autonomous in the sense that it is not fully defined by the causal powers of its constituents, of the system, and its environment. This is so because an indispensable part of the causal power of C is produced by randomness, which has no fixed ontology and does not correspond to the constituents with causal powers. That's very interesting. Like, it's kind of simple. Like, it's not very simple for what it's claiming. The randomness is indispensable because without it, C would not be a cause and there would be no effect on fitness to be. A cause, C, with autonomous causal power must be an autonomous entity. This is based on the notion that something has the potential to influence other entities by having some sort of causal power, has to exist, i.e. has to be an entity. This is one that I feel like a lot of people are going to be arguing with me about if I if I bring this up in debates. The ontological status of of strongly emergent phenomenon. But if you prove that they have causal power, does that not prove that they exist? Like, I don't know. I don't know why people don't understand that. I guess it's because you just think that the causal power is an illusion. That like matter is more fundamental, but I don't know. That sounds unconvincing, and it seems untrue given all of the evidence that I've accumulated in the process of studying this. Okay, so Gouet and Sartanier usefully distinguish three dimensions along which one can analyze emergence. First, their ontological epistemological axis distinguishes ontological emergence, which is out there in the natural world, from epistemological emergence, which is just a consequence of our representation of the natural world. That's such a useful distinction. And one that I got to keep in mind. So what do they say? Ontological epistemological. I would say metaphysical epistemological. Because metaphysical is like actually no, maybe hold on. Maybe metaphysical, it wasn't the right thing. Ontological does pretty much capture whether it exists or not. So ontological as in like really existing, and epistemological as in constructed by our minds, but possibly also artificial, as in like constructed by our minds, but like just like an arbitrary construction. Like if I don't even know like how to explain this. There's a good Vsauce video that explains it. Hold on, maybe I can quickly pull that up. Oh, they got a comment. Genes produce people. People produce society. Society, as environment, selects genes. So the gene pool is altered. So these genes produce an altered society. Society selects different genes. Well put. Well put. Society as environmental genes. So the gene pool is altered. So these genes produce an altered society. So society selects different genes. Yeah, it's a crazy causal feedback loop. Between things. Okay, hold on. What was the Vsauce trogs? Let's see if that does it, because I remember the word trog being in there. Not the trolley problem. God damn it. What was that video about? Or just go to a channel. I don't even know why I'm elaborating on this particular point, but might as well, because yeah, do chairs exist? Here, this is the video. Here. Okay. Hold on. He's like discussing like what counts as a thing and what doesn't. Question. Maybe it's kind of getting like besides the point. About whether the epistemological ontological distinction even makes sense. Like, man, what the hell is even going on in this universe? Because it is kind of true that our minds can arbitrarily carve up things and be like, this is one thing and this counts as another thing. And then it's like a good question of where does the phenomenon exist? I think a very straightforward answer is that if the phenomenon itself has causal power in the universe, the phenomenon exists. No? I mean, it's just like a matter of like where do you carve up the boundaries of that thing, which is a whole nother question. But like clearly, some things don't have boundaries as material objects, like concepts, for example. A concept doesn't just exist in your mind; it exists in the shared minds of everybody who's familiar with the concept. You know, it's like shared in a distributed network between humans. Same with like the meaning of words. Words are meaningful because we all agree that they're meaningful and have the same meanings. And so like the meaning of words is distributed in a neural network consisting of all the brains of the people who understand those words. And I guess like all the writing material and stuff that generally aligns with those definitions. Okay. Okay, so let's continue with the second axis. Second. Their strong-weak axis corresponds to the extent to which emergence is present fundamentally. My take on what they mean by in principle or only in practice. Strong-weak is in principle or only in practice. I don't see how that characterizes strong and weak. Finally, their synchronic diachronic axis corresponds to whether the emergent phenomenon, as an event, a property, or a process, occurs simultaneously with its constituents, such as events, properties, or processes, or distinctly later in time. That's an interesting one. I think I need to like note this. Finally, their synchronic diachronic axis corresponds to the emergent phenomenon, such as an event, a property, or a process, occurs simultaneously with its constituents, such as events, properties, or processes, or distinctly later in time. Okay, so it's just like the time axis. That's a very interesting axis. You know why? Because the fundamental theories of physics assume time reversal symmetry. So if you play an interaction, say between a photon and an electron forwards in time and play it backwards, you wouldn't be able to tell which is forwards and which is backwards. So physics has time reversal symmetry, or at least fundamental physics does, but the universe clearly doesn't, because like things transition from the past to the future. You know, like it's not symmetric. like we're stuck in the process of time. So like the being in the process of time itself must be an emergent phenomenon out of the more fundamental principle of timelessness. That's a cool insight. That's a very cool insight, especially if you're like into metaphysics and you're into like thinking about what other worlds could be, like other worlds that don't have time as a concept. Well, it seems like worlds that don't have time as a concept can give rise strongly emergently to worlds that do have time as a concept. That's very cool. It's very cool to think that our universe might be nested in such a way, because I explained earlier how weakly emergent phenomenon can be nested within a strongly emergent phenomenon, which I think there's a better paper about that later. Okay, so this example is ontological and present fundamentally, not in practice, but it's not purely synchronic, not diachronic either, so it is somewhat synchronic. I think I made a note for myself, not diachronic either. That's interesting how he kind of gives that. It's present fundamentally, not in practice, so it's strongly emergent according to his definition, and it's ontological. It definitely exists according to his definition, and that's probably like the thing that people are going to challenge him on. It's just like, no, it's not ontological. It's just kind of like it's just kind of like a calculation. But of course, a thing doing a calculation on itself is self-referencing. It's a very special kind of condition. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's by referencing itself, it's subject to paradoxes of self-reference. And so what it's going to do is not fully predictable anymore. And that's what the incompleteness theorem is all about, which I'll discuss when I get there. I might need to do 2 streams about this, because I already sense myself losing energy discussing this, because it's already so much. But thank you all for watching. I'm not stopping now, by the way. I'm just thanking you all for watching. I'm just wondering if you guys have any thoughts or any questions, or if I should just proceed. Okay, let's proceed. Weakly emergent phenomena are then novel and surprising, primarily for epistemological reasons. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's true, actually. Like, the reason you would think that a weakly emergent phenomenon is special is because it looks special from our perspectives. But in and of itself is just the fundamental laws giving rise to something. Okay. A system may be so complex that its properties and dynamics cannot be explained in simple terms. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Like, a lot of people are convinced that strong emergence doesn't exist. So the reason is because all cases of strong emergence could possibly just be cases of low computational efficiency. So just like the reason you can't predict what this is going to do is because you don't have enough computing power to like predict it. Like if you did have enough computing power, it would be perfect. Your prediction would be perfect, but you just don't. But this isn't saying that. This is showing that there's something else that arises out of those fundamental laws, and so is also unpredictable by just those laws itself. The reason is because a weakly emergent phenomenon gave rise to a different kind of phenomenon, and that different kind of phenomenon is influencing in like almost like this retroactive way, not retroactive temporally, but retroactive causally, upon the fundamental units, and even influencing the laws of the fundamental units. And that's crazy. And like you can show how it works with something called symmetry breaking, which I'll discuss soon. Um, it's interesting. This stream has so many people watching relative to my Elden Ring streams, at least most of the time. But at the same time, nobody talking. And I suspect it's because nobody knows what to say, because they're probably like, what even the hell is this man talking about? Which is fine and to be expected. Okay, let's see. A system may be so complex that its properties and dynamics may be explained in simple terms. In principle, one could simulate the microdynamics of such a system and thus produce the emergent phenomenon. The phenomenon is then explained computationally, but is still novel and surprising. Yeah, so if your computer can do it, then you know for sure it's weakly emergent. You know, like there's nothing there's that you like again like there's a lot of weakly emergent phenomenon that have been proven to be weakly emergent. So weakly emergent phenomenon do exist. It's not really controversial because they must exist. Like obviously, how does like any structure at all exist in the universe? Like think about your own body and just think about your own like house and like the way it's constructed. How could there be any order amidst any of this if there weren't weakly emergent phenomenon? There clearly are. It's it's easy to show that something is weakly emergent. No, hold on. Let me take that back. It's actually it's if you show that something's weakly emergent, like it's uncontested that it's weakly emergent. But if you can't show that something's weakly emergent, you might think, well, maybe I just haven't been able to show it yet. If I have more computational power, I would be able to. But this construction shows something which cannot, in principle, be derived from the lower fundamental laws. In principle, it's not just like a computational thing. Like it's an undecidability thing. It's built into the fact, and this paper doesn't say it explicitly, but I sense it's built into the fact that the internal process X is an estimate of the organism's own fitness. The organism has a way to represent itself. It's like it has a way to talk about itself, let's say. It has a way to reference itself. And that self-reference creates this paradox where you can't just say what it's going to do. What it's going to do is undecidable. And undecidability is something that I hope people are familiar with because it is well known. What is the name of the discipline that discusses this kind of subject matter? It spans kind of all disciplines at this point. I would say that this discipline, particularly what I'm discussing, is a kind of philosophy. It's a kind of like discussion of philosophical principles, but it's philosophical principles that are bounded within the natural sciences. All the way from fundamental physics to chemistry to biology to society to psychology to kind of all areas of reality. This principle touches upon it, but I would say fundamentally it's philosophy. But you also see it in areas like artificial intelligence research. You see it in computer science because it's very much like computer science is very much at the heart of like showing all of these proofs, because it's what opened us up to undecidability and like made us realize, wait a second, what if the universe itself is undecidable? And then like you start to realize, wait a second, everything is undecidable. What the hell is this place? But then you realize, okay, because it's undecidable, that's why these brand new phenomenon can exist. Phenomenon like the psyche, phenomenon like human consciousness, like language is strongly emergent, like crazy things like life itself and like trees and stuff, just like a normal tree, like that crazy level of complexity can happen in this universe because of undecidability, because of strong emergence. And there's a very strong connection between undecidability and strong emergence, which I think I'm starting to understand from reading all of these papers. You're pioneering this branch of philosophy. No, their pioneers came before me. I'm just kind of gathering all their thoughts. Oops. That was extremely stupid of me. I'm kind of gathering all their thoughts and showing them to the public audience. Maybe I'll just be like the speaker on behalf of this philosophy rather than the person who pioneered it. Because the person who pioneered it, the people who pioneered it are the people I'm talking about who wrote these papers that I'm discussing. But it's crazy how little recognition they get. I think it's because what they're talking about is just so next level complicated that like people it's just hard to understand. Like if you've been listening to me for the past however long I've been speaking, you probably have gotten a sense of how difficult all of this is to understand. But I hope you've like understood why it's so cool, and why it's so interesting, and hopefully you found it interesting as well. Okay, one sec. I've just spilled some water. I'm gonna go just like oh, don't want to get those wet. Okay, I'm gonna just go grab something to clean it up, and I'll be back. Now you can listen to me cleaning water. Just wanted to say, one of the things I love about your videos is the beautiful art you use. Don't know where you get it from, but you have good taste. The imagery assists the ideas wonderfully. That's good to know and good feedback. I'm always like concerned that I'm like using too many images, or irrelevant images, or images that are like too distracting to like what I'm trying to say. But it's good to know that some people find them at least useful for understanding. ASMR of me cleaning. Yeah, this stream has everything. Okay. 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 The phenomenon is then explained computationally. Yeah. Strongly emergent phenomenon, on the other hand, are novel and surprising, primarily for ontological reasons. The reason is because a new thing has come into existence. It's not just a reiteration of old things or a reorganization of old things. It's a completely brand new thing. In particular, such phenomena produce novel causal powers that are not explainable in terms of those of the components of the system and its environment. Crazy that this is even a thing that exists. Okay, so where were we? However, nothing is transformed here because C remains a level of fit, and the causal power is just an emergent addition. Just more description of what C is. Is it a material cause? So I asked this question, and then he answered it. He didn't. He posed the question in the paper, and then I wrote this question here to kind of summarize the question and the discussion. And then he wrote, the common interpretation is that a material cause is a cause that would be completely specified by its material constitution, that is, by its material constituents and their activities and interactions. Moreover, the material constitution must be well defined and must be knowable, at least in principle. This implies that such a cause is amenable to ontological reduction, in the sense of Van Gulik, 2001, at least in theory. If one would reassemble the full material constitution from scratch, then one would get exactly one's material cause and its efficacy, no less and no more. So this is pretty much just saying what would be necessary for it to be actually a case of weak emergence. I think that's what it's saying. Hold on. The common interpretation is that a material cause is a cause that would be completely specified by its material constitution. Yeah, that is, by its material constituents and their activities and interactions. Moreover, the material constitution must be well defined and must be knowable, at least in principle. Okay? This implies that such a cause is amenable to ontological reduction, at least in theory. Okay? If one would reassemble the full material constitution from scratch, then one would get exactly one's material cause and its efficacy, no less and no more. Okay. So that's if C is a material cause. This interpretation does not apply to C. C cannot be reduced to material causes for reasons. If he specifies it more in the paper, I'm sure, if I need to like understand this better. But I believe it. There's good enough reason to assume that this is not a material cause. Especially for someone like me who's familiar with the psyche and what, like, thinking about what the psyche is, but that might need to be justified for somebody who's not super familiar with that. basically because of the randomness. If you rewind, something new will happen when you play it forward. Yeah, so exactly. The pairing of the randomness is what gives this system a strongly emergent property. The mechanism explained above is in fact a realizable counterexample against physical causal closure. That perfect. I need to. This is a point that I need to really emphasize. It'll come up more in my notes, which I may or may not finish today. But basically, where do I start with this? Physical causal closure basically just means that you can account for all causes in terms of of the physics. So the reason a person committed a crime is because the physics in their body just kind of push them to commit the crime, and that's all there is. So it's just physical causal closure. What he's saying is that this mechanism that he constructed is an example of a thing that transcends this physical system, exists apart from it, is not predictable by that system, has emerged because of the system. So let's make that clear. It emerges because of the system, but it kind of takes on this new ontological status as being apart from the system. Because it's because of a combination of randomness and determinism. It's not, you can't determine it with physical causes because that random component means that you'll be able to predict that, but it's random. If you had your physical laws be able to predict that, it wouldn't be random. But the whole mechanism utilizes randomness in its process. So in that sense, it produces it's hold on. So I'll just start with the main thing that I want to get across, and it's the fact that this system is incomplete. This system involving multiple components and their mathematical relationships to each other, it has statements within it that are true but cannot be proved by those most fundamental things. So it has and it kind of it causally emerges, it weakly emerges. Hold on, how do I put this? It has this weakly emergent thing. Okay, so a weakly emergent phenomenon arises from those parts. That weakly emergent phenomenon then has this influence on those parts, and then somehow gains the status of strong emergence. Maybe that's not the right way to put it. And in fact, I had a feeling that what I just said wasn't exactly accurate. But maybe that's because I need more information. Okay, hold on. So the mechanism is fully against physical causal closure. Yeah, I need to develop this more. I will. Okay. Van Gulik, 2001, states that mainstream atomistic physicalism assumes two core principles, namely, AP1, the features of macro items are determined by the features of their micro parts plus their mode of combination, and AP2, the only law-like regularities needed for the determination of macro features by micro features are those that govern the interactions of those micro features in all contexts, systemic or otherwise. Okay, I understood the first one. The only law-like regularities needed for the determination of macro features by micro features are those that govern interactions of those micro features in all contexts, systemic or otherwise. Got it. Okay, yeah. So that's a good way to summarize just pure determinism that doesn't have the concept of emergence. That pretty much everything can be explained, even human behavior can be explained by just particles doing what particles do according to very fundamental laws. Now that I know what I know, I can see even problems with just stating that, because there is no fundamental theory that currently exists. We have a theory, but it's currently provisional because it doesn't work with gravity. So you have this theory, and the theory itself is incomplete, and yet physicalists are claiming that you can use it to derive all human behavior. It's the theory itself doesn't even appear to be causally closed. It doesn't even appear to be the most fundamental theory. We need a more fundamental theory, and yet people are making claims on this being all you need to kind of predict everything that's going to happen in the universe. It's definitely not true. And it's not true for very cool reasons that are that are understood and perfectly well defined in a mathematical space. The concepts of undecidability and the concepts um, of irreducibility are perfectly well understood mathematically. So it's very interesting that these two kind of like a mathematical construction and the universe are kind of um, compatible with each other. Because not all math actually describes the universe. Some math is just done for fun. Like math that uses like 20 different dimensions. Like that's not our universe, but you can still do math there. Okay. For example, the process X is, as a matter-based process, fully defined by how its micro items are combined as an AP1. So this process X right here, this is a weakly emergent phenomenon inside this thing. Or at least the author can construct it in such a way. It could be so. So in real life examples, this could be a strongly emergent phenomenon, but in this particular construction, it's a weakly emergent phenomenon because it arises from the material components of the system S. So S is the organism. X is a process within the organism that can increase the rate of random mutations or decrease it depending on its level of fitness. However, the interactions of its micro-features are not the only law-like regularities that are needed for understanding the causal efficacy of X. So yeah. Actually, let me just keep reading. I don't want to lose my train of thought. Contra AP2. Okay, hold on. So, however, the interactions of its micro-features are not the only law-like regularities that are needed for understanding the causal efficacy of X. Contra AP2. In addition, the emergent law-like regularity, the factor C, which depends on X, affects fitness to B, is needed. Hold on. In addition, the emergent law-like regularity, the factor C, which depends on X, affects fitness to B. In addition, the emergent law-like regularity, factor C, which depends on X. Okay, yeah. That's just explaining what C does in the system. This regularity is not fully defined by X, nor by X and its context, i.e. by the inclusive system. This regularity is not fully defined. Yeah, okay, so like this process is not fully defined by X, but it involves C as well, influencing it from a different plane, let's say, of existence relative to that system. The mechanism constructed above shows that strong emergence, taken here to be the near synchronic, ontological, and fundamentally present emergence of causal power. Near synchronic, yeah. Ontological. Oh, he said near synchronic, so I guess that means like near, almost happening simultaneously with the direction that the organism moves in across time. Ontological and more fundamentally present emergence of a causal power is feasible in a universe that appears to be fully based on microphysical laws. This is enabled by the fact that randomness escapes such laws, at least in its detailed realizations. Yeah, i.e. its actual outcomes. The proposed mechanism takes advantage of this non-deterministic loophole in the apparent law-like nature of reality. Yeah, it resembles a population of organisms undergoing Darwinian natural selection, with crucial differences that conventional natural selection depends on a rate of random change R that is either fixed or at least not systemically modulated by an internal estimate of each organism's own evolutionary fitness. Yeah, so this is just basically saying that in most cases, like for example in humans, you don't alter your own genetic information on the fly. There's some evidence that you do, but like generally speaking, you don't. What I mean by that is that, like, for example, let's if you can't digest milk, if you're lactose intolerant, it's a consequence of like the way your genes are, right? But can you go and alter your genes on the fly so that you can now digest milk? You can theoretically, right? But it's very difficult. Most organisms don't do that. But some organisms do. Some organisms do at the very microscale. Like some cells, they can on the fly alter their own genetic material and create new mutations, and just to see what would happen. And most of those mutations, if you know anything about evolution and you know anything about the way DNA works, most of those random mutations are going to be useless. right? But every once in a while, you might get a useful random mutation. And it's for that reason that the organism is willing to kind of scramble its own DNA to potentially get something that's useful. Which is incredible. So some cells are capable of this, but most large-scale organisms are not capable of this without like super advanced technology. But it still works if you, instead of natural selection, instead of random mutations, replace this random rate of change with just random behavioral changes. And it's exactly compatible with how humans exist. And again, it's still strongly emergent. Okay, so let's move on to another paper by this same guy. I read a bunch of his. I know that some were relevant, but I decided not to read them too closely because they involved math that was just kind of hurting my brain at a certain point. Yeah, but I'll still go over them because this guy in particular is very interesting, and the arguments he constructs are very interesting. Let's move into a more comfortable position. Okay, so yeah, I made a note for myself. This one also shows that strong emergence can exist, and it seems like it does exist in a particular form, and you can prove that it is strongly emergent. And that's the key thing here, right? Like all of this is shown to be strongly emergent. You can prove this with math that this is strongly emergent. And we'll go into some examples of like papers that mathematically prove that a particular phenomenon is emergent. I'm not going to do the mathematical proof because you could just if you really want to see it, you can just go to the original paper and check it out. But that's really above what I'm above my purposes, let's say, for this. I'm a person who uses words. I don't use math so much, even though the math is very important, and you can check for yourself if you're a math person. Okay, so this paper talks about semiosis, and semiosis is just simply meaning making. Not always in the context of language, sometimes in the context of like making meaning of your environment, for example, like using your perceptions to make meaning of your environment. Or make meaning out of like biological goals, like it's meaningful to eat or like meaningful to reproduce. So in this paper, this was like a letter or something. It's only 2 pages, yeah, just a little bit. But he talks about an old paper where he came up with a process inside organisms called X, which approximates fitness, and it can either be intracellular processes in single-celled organisms, intracellular processes in organisms like plants. Again, so all this is just a process inside X which estimates its own fitness. And that can be all sorts of things. Like I'll bring up, so if some of you guys weren't watching the whole time, I'll bring up a couple more examples of such processes. For example, if you're adapted to cold weather, and you're in the midst of cold weather, you can estimate your own fitness and realize, okay, well, I'm adapted for cold weather, and there's cold weather outside, so my fitness is good. But then if you're suddenly plopped into an environment that's extremely hot, and you're adapted for cold weather, you can immediately sense that you're not adapted for this environment. You can see the environment, you can represent it internally, and you can check if there's a consistency between your internal environment and your own level of fitness. So your ability to estimate your own level of fitness is a process that can exist inside you, either through biochemical phenomenon, which like detect the environment, for example, if you're a single-celled organism, or through like perception and like detecting your environment through your sense perceptions, and then putting that information inside your head. So your ability to represent the external world is a way to check fitness, internal fitness relative to external circumstances. Or like neural processes in the brain, exactly like perception. It is distributed like a neural network, including sensors. So this is what he came up with in a previous paper. It monitors an organism's internal state and external environment. It is associated with the Umwelt concept. It's actually interesting that I'm seeing this again, Umwelt, because there was a book that I read that was like very influential on me early in my Jungian days by, what's his name, Anthony Stevens, trying to link evolution with Jungian psychology, and it's good. Like it does like some things that make sense with respect to Jungian psychology, but then I think that like by trying to match it too closely to evolution, he missed some kind of fundamental concepts in Jungian psychology and didn't understand them particularly well. And so kind of came up with some ideas that are overall pretty good, but are lacking like a proper understanding of the psyche. Anyways, so that's why I'm just interested in this Umwelt world word. It just basically means your environment, but not just. So it means your environment in the context of being a biological organism. So it's your kind of like internal understanding of your environment. And it doesn't, and the reason like it's a new concept rather than just being like perception is because you don't perceive the world in like a totally accurate, non-biased way. You perceive the world in a way that's like conducive to evolution. You know, like the way we perceive things is constrained by what's useful for us as humans. And so this causes you to see the world very differently. For example, you see the other sex in a very particular way because your brain kind of has a predisposed way to see the opposite sex, because it's a very important concept to grasp as a living biological organism if you want to reproduce. And so the way you perceive reality is shaped by what's useful for survival. So you're not just perceiving it objectively, you're perceiving it through your Umwelt. So like your inner kind of psychological processes are influencing the way you perceive the external world, but you're still perceiving the external world. It's just that the way your mind is predisposed will cause you to see it in a certain way. So imagine this process within an organism that approximates its own fitness, and there are multiple mechanisms that can accommodate this. X changes the organism's behavior in a non-deterministic way. A level of fitness, as indicated by X, is used to modulate the rate of behavioral change. Individual changes are still made randomly. Okay, so I remember. So yeah, so this this is pretty much describing what I described in the earlier paper up here, but it's using random rate of behavioral change rather than random rate of DNA mutation. And it's like the same process, you know, it's the same like kind of idea, and it still gives rise to a strongly emergent phenomenon. Individual changes are still made randomly. This non-deterministic mode of operation is one of two crucial factors needed for letting meaning emerge from non-meaning. The other crucial factor is the presence of conventional evolutionary pressure. The mechanism can be shown to increase fitness and to be evolvable, originally shown through computational analysis, but more recently through mathematical analysis as well. Okay, hold on. So he showed using math that why this is a non-deterministic mode of operation. Let me just read that again. This non-deterministic mode of operation is one of two crucial factors needed for letting meaning-making emerge from non-meaning. The other crucial factor is the presence of conventional evolutionary pressure. The mechanism can be shown to increase fitness and to be evolvable, originally shown through computational analysis. Okay, so he showed that this mechanism in a simulation was able to be actually. I think it mentioned somewhere else that he showed in a simulation why this particular mechanism that he described is the best for survival. It's consistent with the best kind of strategies for survival and surviving and reproducing in a natural environment, in computer simulations, which is very, you know, like it kind of reveals why strongly emergent phenomenon can be so powerful. Is because if an organism has a mechanism that's strongly emergent, it's able to do brand new things and like kind of try out new things as it attempts to survive. Otherwise, it'll be just confined by the basic laws that govern its parts. And by being confined to those laws, your ability to do novel things or to have novel properties will be limited. And so having a mechanism that enables strong emergence is very much conducive for evolution, and it looks like computer simulations prove that. Okay, so let us continue. X is associated with semiosis because it is an internal process evaluating an organism's prospects. Yeah, that's very cool. So it's like if you imagine this X as just being perception, like the ability to perceive your environment and to perceive your own internal state. because if you perceive your own internal state, you're also kind of referencing yourself. You have the ability to think about yourself, and that causes a self-referential paradox, which will give rise to undecidability, and hence determinism does not, strictly speaking, apply to you. So because it is an internal process evaluating an organism's prospects, but also with agency, because it breaks determination and produces some behavioral freedom. And with aboutness, because parts of X are about parts of the external world. Yeah, that just speaks to the accuracy of your internal model to the external world. And it can depend on having a very specific Umwelt. These phenomena are strongly emergent, and they are in fact just different aspects of the same core phenomenon. Oh, so cool. Yeah, these are just different aspects of the same core phenomenon. It gives you agency. So here's we're starting to see hints of how free will can start to emerge. Because the deterministic factor that's responsible for that's partially responsible for the way the organism behaves is the emergent phenomenon itself. So if you think of free will as an emergent phenomenon, it is causally related to what you do. So you have free will, and then you can show that your free will, which is this emergent phenomenon, can cause what you do. And it isn't just the lower levels that are causing what you do. This higher emergent thing can have a downward effect on those fundamental constituents, and even break those fundamental constituents, or break the laws governing those fundamental constituents, such that the laws need to be modified in order to accommodate this new emergent phenomenon. God, this is a lot of fun to talk about. Okay, so X correlates to fitness, but it isn't exactly the same as fitness. There is no pre-existing causal connection between X and fitness. A random variation of... so there's no pre-existing causal connection between X and fitness. Because, again, it's just an estimate of fitness. It's like this abstract property related to fitness. A random variation of X that happens to let X approximate fitness is better than likely to be retained. Did I copy that properly? Because it leads to more offspring on average. By this process, X and fitness become correlated gradually. Yeah. It's so weird. It's just like, it's like the system. It's exactly what Emblematic mentioned earlier. Let me read his comment again. That I think captures this pretty well. If you're still there, Emblematic. Genes produce people. People produce society. Society as environment selects genes. So the gene pool is altered. So these genes produce an altered society. So society selects different genes. So genes produce people, and then people can have this downward causal influence on genes that in a way that the genes themselves couldn't predict. Because the genes gave rise to this emergent phenomenon, and it's a strongly emergent phenomenon. So I got to be more specific when I mean gives rise to this emergent phenomenon. It gives rise through a very specific dynamic, because that may sound contradictory. Like, it's giving rise to a phenomenon that it can't predict. Then how did it give rise to it? It gives rise to it because it produces, and this is my understanding of it right now, so I might need to modulate what I'm about to say. It gives rise to a weakly emergent phenomenon. That weakly emergent phenomenon has some kind of symmetry breaking property on the smaller phenomenon, on the smaller scale phenomenon. That produces a kind of new fundamental theory that's slightly different from the original fundamental theory, which gives rise to a strongly emergent phenomenon. Okay? So that original theory that you had can't be used to predict that strongly emergent phenomenon. It's like this weird circular relationship between things that's like causing a new property to exist. It's very cool. It's like very circular, very procedural. But because it's operating, it gives rise to this higher thing, and that higher thing now has substantiality in the form of causal determination. That's how it defines substantiality. Something is real if you can show it to be causally connected to things that happen in the universe. Okay, let's continue. So I think that this is the paper where he describes that phenomenon that I mentioned. Let me just take a sip of water. By the way, any questions or any any feedback for what's going on? Any questions at all? Like, don't worry if you don't, don't feel stupid if you don't understand this. Like, it's very complicated. There's something, honestly, there's something about it that's very transcendental of how humans are supposed to understand reality. Like there's something about this that's like another level of reality that humans are not really supposed to be aware of, and yet we've become aware of it. We've reached the level of becoming aware of it because all of these papers have shown it. So yeah, don't worry if it's like hard to understand. Like even the most fundamental questions could be revealing if you say something. Oh, messages. Okay. Anyways, no questions. Let's continue. Biological organisms appear to have agency, goals, and meaningful behavior. One possibility is that this is mere appearance, where such properties are not real, but only as if consequences of the physiological structure of organisms. Yeah, so like you might see an organism and be like, it wants food, and so it has agency, but that sense of agency could just be the result of physiological processes or physical processes just taking place, and it just looks like agency. So it's just like our interpretation of what an animal does rather than the real causes behind that animal's behavior. But another possibility is that these properties are real, emerging from the organism's structure and from how the organism interacts with its environment. So this paper shows that the second paper is correct. This is the construction that the author was talking about in the paper that we just read right before this one. And he's showing, because basically what happened was he produced this mechanism and he published it. And then people were like, oh, it's a really cool example of weak emergence. And then he was like, no, it's actually an example of strong emergence, and here's why. So he explained why it is in this paper, and then he elaborated on it even further in this paper, which really shows how it's strongly emergent in a very formal, systematic, and rigorous process, which I went through. Which I have a sheet of paper which describes this mechanism in detail, and it took me so long to get through it, but once I understood it, I was like, oh, okay. No, yeah, that makes sense. It was surprisingly simple, actually, after it was all put together. But I was like, okay, so even very simple mechanisms can give rise to strong emergence, which means strong emergence shouldn't be rare at all. Because I'm sure I'm going to get feedback being like, well, you haven't proved that consciousness is strongly emergent. And I'm going to be like, there are way simpler things that have been proven to be strongly emergent. So you don't think consciousness is strongly emergent? It's like that would be crazy. Okay, so let me go back to this paper. Okay. In the theory presented, let me just highlight what I'm reading so you guys can see. In the theory presented, the sign is an internalized version of fitness, i.e. expected reproductive rate, which refers to the true fitness through a feedback loop that in effect produces interpretation. The feedback loop entangles deterministic and stochastic forms of causation in such a way that genuine agency, goal-directedness, and their associated meaning emerge. Let's take that in for a second. So the feedback loop, he creates this loop within a biological organism that entangles deterministic and stochastic forms of causation. Deterministic forms of causation, hopefully that's clear by now. Stochastic just means random. Stochastic is another word for random, probably like random in a more formal context, but still random, like unpredictable. And when you create this loop that involves deterministic and stochastic factors, you can produce an organism that has agency, that appears to have agency, but also probably does have agency because agency is an emergent phenomenon from this system, goal-directedness, and their associated meaning. So meaning itself, as in like the organism's ability to make meaning of its environment or make meaning of itself. Which we can think of as like a very crude form of sentience, or we can just think of it as sentience, as being the same thing, because it's not implied what it is exactly. But again, meaning is a thing that exists. Like you make meaning of your environment all the time. Even if without consciousness, you can make meaning of your environment, such as when you look at an animal and know that it's a living thing. Like you've just made meaning out of an element of your environment. So I think that's what it means by meaning here. Okay, a biological organism may be seen as a purely material system driven by environmental factors and by an organism's genetic and physiological structure. So that's just like pure determinism. But it also may be seen as an individual with agency and goals. Okay, so how do you meld these two things together? A basic question that has been haunting biological thinking for a long time is whether the second view is a mere consequence of the first view or whether it adds something extra. Okay. So this is a really good paragraph for like defining the difference between weak and strong emergence. But more importantly, the distinction between determinism, pure determinism, and emergence. Because the question is, does agency itself give rise to something which affects those physiological processes in a downward rather than upward manner? Because upwardly, the physical processes give rise to the circumstances which enables agency to exist. But then the question is, does agency itself have causal existence? Does it really exist? And I asked the same question about free will. And I guess free will and agency are almost the same thing in this context. But is free will this emergent phenomenon that can have a downstream effect upon the physical parts that have enabled its existence? And the answer is unambiguously yes. Okay, so I see I have 8 viewers. Thank you all for watching. I'm going to just quickly head to the bathroom again, and I'll be back. Yourself to tears. Okay, I'm back. Hi, my 7 viewers. Wondering if you guys are the same guys who were here before. I'd appreciate some kind of comment or something. But thank you for the people who have been commenting. Epimandic, Siamini, Armand, Utopian Buddha. Appreciate it. Okay. Let me go back and just read this again because it's so good for what my purpose is. A biological organism may be seen as a purely material system driven by environmental factors and by the organism's genetic and physiological structure. But it may also be seen as an individual with agency and goals. A basic question that has been haunting biological thinking for a long time is whether the second view is a mere consequence of the first view or whether it adds something extra. The mere consequence idea implies that it is enough to study an organism's structure and physiology in as much detail as possible. Such a detailed analysis will then eventually show that agency and goals are not real but only apparent in an as-if kind of way. On the other hand, the adds something extra idea... Hold on, let me go back. The mere consequence idea implies that it is enough to study an organism's structure and physiology in as much detail as possible. So that's sufficient. Let me highlight that. That it's sufficient to just look at the particles and that'll tell you everything that the organism will do. Such a detailed analysis will then eventually show that agency and goals are not real but only apparent in an as-if kind of way. On the other hand, the add something extra idea seems to require ingredients that have no counterpart in the non-living material world. Introducing such ingredients on an ad hoc basis is an unattractive proposition. So this has been the view, I think, in material sciences for a while. But the view is wrong, as is shown in this paper and in all of the subsequent papers that I've been reading. A stochastic process... Okay, so yeah, this is describing stochasticism. This will probably give a good definition. A stochastic process produces change over time that are not caused by upstream factors but arise spontaneously. This change may then become a starting point of novel downstream causal chains, arrow. Stochastic causation may originate from thermal or quantum noise, from untraceable external disturbances of a system, and from unstable dynamics that amplifies microscopic uncertainties, as in chaos. Stochastic causation implies unpredictability. originate from thermal or quantum noise. It's very interesting because quantum noise is, I understand, like that's just quantum randomness. So like stochasticism is randomness. So quantum noise is probably like a very very unambiguous case of quantum randomness, I would say. Like, I think hidden variable theory, which I think which is contrary to quantum randomness, has been shown to be wrong by recent experiments. And actually, there was a paper that I wanted to read about that, about Bell's theorem, connecting Bell's theorem to free will, actually, as well as to undecidability. But I took it off my list because I was already exhausted by all the stuff that I'd been reading. Okay, so this change may cause become a starting point of downstream causal chains. Yeah, so to discuss all of this is like a deeper explanation of the looping between causal determinism and stochastic determinism and how you can get agency and meaning out of them. And I read this and I looked at this. And the great thing about this paper is that I understood it. The great thing is that I wasn't like forcing myself or just accepting things as truths. I looked at this diagram and I understood what was going on here. And then I saw, okay, it is an actual loop that does produce these things. It's very similar to the loop above, so maybe it's not important to go into too much detail because I've already described this one to death, and not even really that. But okay, let's keep reading. Yeah, so if it originates from thermal noise, like I need to, so there's something I need to work on. What is the source of randomness? Because I believe quantum noise, but I also have this intuition that any kind of randomness can be randomness relative to a system which is causally closed, but because it's being affected by randomness, isn't causally closed. It's something like relative randomness. Maybe I need to do more research to find out, but I definitely don't want to like. If that comes up again and somebody brings it up as a point, I'll hopefully understand what they're talking about, because it is a good point, and it is probably something like an area of this field that needs to be talked about more, or maybe it has been talked about, but I haven't come across the resources. I can definitely think of some things in physics that apply to this, maybe. Okay. Yeah, quantum noise from untraceable external disturbances of a system and from unstable dynamics that amplifies microscopic uncertainties, as in chaos. Stochastic causation implies unpredictability. Stochasticity is ubiquitous in nature in general and living organisms in particular, from the molecular to the behavioral level. The molecular level is obviously like DNA and random mutations, because you never know what you're going to get with a random mutation, just random. And then behaviorally, it's like that example that I mentioned earlier about like how your brain can spontaneously generate random ideas, and then every once in a while those random ideas might be useful. And so like idea generation within your mind is a random process, but then like you can latch onto that random process to produce something useful in a way that you can show that it can't be predicted by the smaller components of that system. Yeah, it's very cool. It's very cool how randomness and determinism can be coupled like this. And it's a very like specific kind of coupling. It's not just randomness and determinism, like just mix and match in whatever way you want. It's mix and match in a very particular way. And I'm wondering, like, well, if I explain this to Sam Harris, would he understand it? Or would he just be like, no, because determinism doesn't give you free will, and randomness doesn't give you free will, and no combination of determinism and free will and randomness can give you free will. But what I'd respond to that would be to say, like, no, actually, this guy has created multiple systems that are easy to understand and which probably do exist in nature, which you can show are strongly emergent and have properties which are not predictable from the smaller components, and which are able to do so by utilizing a special combination of randomness and determinism. That would be my response to him. And this has been shown. It's been mathematically verified. And it's not the only example of this system, because I've said there's lots of examples of strongly emergent systems. I don't just have to rely on this one. There have been proteins that have been shown to be strongly emergent. There have been crystals that have been shown to be strongly emergent have strongly emergent properties, and I'll get into all of those. And there's lots of examples of potentially strongly emergent phenomenon, like the quantum Hall effect. And some of them are very interesting. Like some of them just go in directions that you're not expecting. Like you're not expecting like very small things to have examples of strong emergence, but they do, which makes you realize that strong emergence must be ubiquitous, and it's very unlikely that consciousness is weakly emergent. Especially relative to, and again, this is all relative to the fundamental theory. So the fundamental physical laws are just not enough to predict what a conscious organism will do, because it has this extra thing that can cause it to act in ways that are contrary to how you would expect the laws of physics to play out. Okay, so we talked about stochastic processes. Okay, so I think this is my description, but let's get into it. Modified stochastic causation. Okay, so let me just describe this diagram in a sec, roughly, which is, it shows a few different types of causation. Okay, so this A is just showing one thing causes another. This first hump causes another. This B shows random, like, so nothing causes this to happen, it just happens spontaneously, so it's completely random. What C shows is something causing a random process to happen, okay? So like something happens, so like something causes something else, and that cause is directly produces a random effect that's undetermined, okay? So you're mixing determinism and randomness. Okay, and then here, he shows that you can take these components and put them in this loop system that gives you this brand new thing called modified stochastic causation. I think it's called that, but it might be called something else. And I think maybe it could be that C is modified stochastic causation, and D is a different thing that he has a different term for. But you can show that a combination of these factors gives rise to this special loop that has a strongly emergent property. Okay, so let's talk about it. Or can I even skip this? No, let's talk about it. Deterministic causation is when one variable causes another variable linearly, and it was caused by something else in the past. Simple. Stochastic causation is when a new cause spontaneously comes into existence due to randomness and starts a chain of new causes. But then modulated stochastic causation combines both, and it is when a variable caused in the past by other variables causes a stochastic variable, which causes downstream changes. Okay? So something causes something, and then that causes a stochastic something. And then there's a crazy loop version of this. This is all my notes. A crazy loop version of all this, which can generate agency and meaning. R is a reproductive loop where organisms reproduce with a rate that corresponds to their fitness, and this rate is defined as number of offspring per unit time. So that's just reproduction rate within this organism. Fitness is how well the organism is doing, so like how much it's reproducing, or how much it has the ability to reproduce. The environment here varies with time. That's just another factor. P is the population size or other environmental influences, and it affects reproduction and fitness. Basically, just like if population is high, again, this is not that important, but if population is high, then fitness goes down because like you're competing against your other members of your species for resources and stuff. In addition, was that a Freudian slip? Am I addicted to emergence? In addition to the true F, there is also a subject-generated fitness generated. Okay. In addition to the true F, so the true fitness, there's also a subject-generated fitness generated by the organism itself. And I put in parentheses here, self-reference. This is crucial. The organism can represent itself internally. Specifically, it can represent its own fitness. And again, there's plenty of examples that show that this is the case. It is assumed to produce a reasonable approximation of the value of F true. So it is self-estimated fitness. This is not explicit statistical knowledge in the organism. When F est Yeah, so it's not explicit. It doesn't have to be explicit statistical knowledge. It's just an estimate, right? When Fest, so the estimate of fitness, is above the replacement level, the organism is probably doing well, so it doesn't need to change its behavior. Okay? But when it is below the replacement level, it needs to change its behavior to avoid negative outcomes. So it starts like this. It starts increasing this rate of random behavioral change. So this deliberate process, this deterministic process, sets into motion a random change. So it deliberately causes a random change in the organism's behavior, and it increases the rate of random changes. So the rate of random behaviors that the organism does is now increased because there's a mismatch between its fitness prediction and its actual fitness relative to the environment. So then it activates this random. It activates a specific process, a deterministic process, which activates a random process, so that the organism starts doing new behavior that might eventually make its fitness higher. So it'll start, like, for example, if an organism is in an environment that's not suited to its biology, it'll start doing different things. It's like, okay, normally I look for food by climbing trees, but this place has no trees. So let me try something else. Let me try digging and seeing if that gets me my food. So it'll try different things because of this process. And again, you can show in computer simulations that an organism equipped with this process, with this stochastic process, rather than being governed entirely by deterministic rules, has a very strong evolutionary advantage. These organisms will tend to reproduce relative to organisms that don't have this process. Okay. Am I talking to you? I'm definitely talking too fast, but whatever. How are you guys doing, my 7 viewers? I don't know if any of you are actually viewers, but I know that there are definitely some people who are viewing, even though I don't know if all of you are. But yeah, thanks for viewing. This is fun for me. Hopefully it's fun for you as well. Okay, so low F estimate means that this will cause a random change in behavior by producing a stochastic variable that will go in a random direction. So that's, again, choosing random behaviors or causing a process that deliberately has random behaviors. A change could be bad, but if a lot of changes keep occurring, i.e. the rate of changes is high, there's a good chance that a random change will be beneficial for the organism. If a behavior is good, F estimate increases and random behaviors are reduced while this behavior is repeated more. So yeah, it can also, so let's say it starts choosing a different behavior. If that behavior increases fitness, it can start to just do that behavior more because fitness has now increased. Okay, so now I can turn off the rate of random behaviors that occurs. So now I can just keep doing this. And it just shows that how, like, this new system that uses emergence, that uses randomness and determination, can have goal-directed agency because that randomness gives, in a deterministic way, an organism the ability to do new things that are not captured deterministically by the previous state of the organism, and which ultimately move towards the goal of increasing one's own fitness. And important things to realize here are the fact that the organism has a way to represent itself. It's self-referencing. That's a very important key. I'm not probably good enough at explaining what the relationship between that and emergence is, but there is a relationship for sure. I just have to piece it together. It's very complicated. It has to do with the fact that any system of mathematics that you can construct will have true statements within that system that can't be proven in terms of the axioms of that system. And so there's a sense in which this new stochastic mechanism, this new process within the organism, is now capable of doing things that you can't tell or you can't determine from the fundamental laws because it just exists outside of that system. It doesn't exist outside of the system. It exists within the system. It's just that the fundamental laws will never allow you to get to that particular new property or that new thing that has emerged. And that refers to mathematical incompleteness. But what this is showing is that mathematical incompleteness has to apply to physical systems. It has to. It has to. It's impossible for it to not. especially in a world as complicated as the one we live in, and where mathematical truths have been shown time and time again to be true. And so incompleteness must be a component of those mathematical systems that govern physics, and govern everything, really, like even biology, chemistry, economics. In particular, populations that incorporate this mechanism outcompete populations with a fixed variability of behavior. Again, showing why this is evolutionary advantageous. And again, you can create this system and show that it's strongly emergent, but this doesn't necessarily mean that this system has free will. What I want to show is that free will itself is kind of emergent from a system like this. Free will is an additional strongly emergent phenomenon that occurs in organisms with a high degree of sentience. Just a high degree of sentience. Sentience is what gives us free will. And so in that sense, it's emergent from free will. Strongly so. Or actually, it could be weakly emergent from the laws of sentience, so to speak. But then sentience itself could be strongly emergent, therefore implying that free will is strongly emergent relative to the fundamental laws of physics, but not relative to like the laws of sentience. Let's say it's complicated. I know it's complicated. Like it's there's got to be a good way to explain this. I gotta think about it for a future video because I want to be able to explain this, but like. I mean, that's why I'm doing the stream, to just talk about this and like get my thoughts out and like see if there's a way to explain this. But basically what I'm having in mind right now is that I can show mathematical axiomatic system and then show incompleteness within that system, and then show how that can also apply to real physical systems. But then I can make complete systems just by adding additional axioms. Adding those additional axioms introduces its own level of completeness, but it might be able to explain in a weakly emergent way some phenomenon that's arising from them, even though it itself might be a strongly emergent phenomenon. Yeah, I know, confusing as shit, but but I hopefully what I'm saying will be shown to be true. Okay, it is important to stress that the value of F estimate is very unlikely to be explicitly represented in the form of a single physiological variable. Rather, it suffices to be present only implicitly as a distributed and diffuse process operating throughout the physiology of the bacterium. Stress that the value F is very unlikely to be explicitly represented in the form of a single physiological variable. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Like the estimate of fitness is probably itself a sophisticated structure, or it depends on if it's a sophisticated structure. Rather, it suffices to be present only implicitly as a distributed and diffuse process operating throughout the physiology of the bacterium. In an analogous manner, you can think of like being distributed within our neural circuitry. So your environment, if you for example, if you look at your environment, the way it looks is distributed across the neurons in your brain that deal with vision, and so that itself becomes a representation of the external environment. Thus, both the form and the value of F are taken to be distributed entities, but nevertheless as real as they come. I just thought of an interesting question, because if you look at the stochastic nature of this system, the randomness, you can say that like whatever outcome happens from that random process, you didn't control. It's just randomness. So how can you say to be assuming that this eventually gets you to free will, how do you get from this to, what am I trying to say? How do you incorporate free will into that stochastic element, into that randomness element? Because you're not controlling the random outcomes, they just kind of happen. First of all, you can show that you can control the random process, but independently of that, I can make another argument for why you could still have free will. Just let me think about it. So the randomness is causing you didn't control. Yeah, okay. So making the assumption that in order for you to have free will, you have to be in control of everything that ever happens. It's a fallacy, because like when people say free will, do you mean the ability to do anything that's ever happened? Like the ability to do literally anything? It's like that's already an impossibility. So by free will, we should really mean like the ability to make choices and have agency. Um, and it's possible to get agency out of a process that utilizes determinism and randomness. Agency is a consequence of that. Um, and so, yeah, even though you're not controlling the specific randomness of the thing, by utilizing randomness, you can get a system that has agency, that can make choices. So hopefully that addresses that. Okay, the A loop produces goals and agency. The form of F estimate is defined by which environmental and internal variables an organism uses as predictors of F est. And this you can show that like there's different ways to predict your own fitness, and there might be better ways and worse ways. And so an organism with a better prediction of its fitness will live longer and have behavior that's more conducive for survival. The form of Fs is defined by the environment and internal variables, which your organism uses as predictors, and in which way it uses them. The form of Fs determines what kind of behaviors are possible. Fs is a genuine goal for the organism. Man. Do you guys have any suggestions for how I can turn this material into a script for a video? Because it's a lot of material. Yeah. It's going to be a long journey to explain all of this. I'm trying to think, like, what's the best way to approach this? Or maybe I should, like, approach it over and over again to get all of the intricacies of this thoroughly. I don't know. I was just checking my own stream to see if people said that there was viewers there. Okay. Let's continue. Okay. So, yeah, okay. So maybe I should, like, even talk about this a bit more because it's claiming here that the A loop produces goals and agency. And I've so far talked about it as if I'm convinced by that, but let's just play devil's advocate and ask a question. How does it produce agency? And then let this guy explain. The form of F est is defined by which environmental and internal variables an organism uses as predictors of F est, and in which way it uses them. Okay. The form of F est determines what kind of behaviors are possible. Yeah, okay. Fs is a genuine goal for the organism. Notice that this is capital Fs. Is there a difference? No, it's capital because it started the sentence. Yeah, so its own subjective estimate of fitness, which is supposed to correspond to its true fitness, is something that exists in a sense like a priori. And the form of its fitness estimate determines what the organism will do. And then he says that the estimate of F is a goal. So the organism is trying to get a good estimate of its own fitness. That in and of itself is a goal for the organism. And if it has a goal, it has agency, because agency is the ability to act on a goal or to bring a goal forth. So it has a goal, which is high fitness, a high fitness estimate. It also has the goal of high fitness, but that's just like a consequent goal, or like that's a fundamental goal, let's say. And then F estimate is also an auxiliary goal. Auxiliary, that's a hard word to say. The details of the behavioral trajectory are unpredictable because of the stochasticity, but the overall direction of the trajectory depends on the goal. Let me just turn off my camera. Okay, just to save some power. The details of the behavioral trajectory are unpredictable because of stochasticity, but the overall direction of the trajectory depends on the goal, namely high F est. The behavior therefore combines a certain spontaneity in the form of stochasticity with a certain deliberateness in the form of striving for high F est. Such a combination is the signature of agency, at least an elementary form of agency. I mean, yeah, I got to keep that in mind as well. This is where I was. That, like, this shows that this system shows an example of strong emergence, an unambiguous example of strong emergence, but in and of itself is not like a very high level strong emergent phenomenon. It's a very simple thing. And so I might not need to refer to this when explaining free will as a strongly emergent phenomenon, but it would be useful to show that such phenomenon exist at very fundamental levels, to just show that it's not rare. This happens. It's real. And so I mean, yeah, it just shows that like free will has a lot of free will in a sense, because of how much our consciousness can accurately map the external world, producing these kind of self-referential paradoxes which allow us to escape determinism. And I'm wondering if like this coupling of randomness and determinism actually takes into account causal incompleteness, or just like incompleteness in general, mathematical incompleteness, because I haven't seen that connection yet. So I mean, I have seen it in the sense that F refers to itself, to its own fitness. So there's a kind of self-reference there, but this paper doesn't specifically state that as being the cause of the determinism. Of the agency, or of the strong emergence. Okay, let's continue. I mean, I have some ideas for videos, but I gotta I guess I'll do this another time, maybe tomorrow, or tomorrow. And like as I'm doing this, I'll write down some of my ideas for how to make this video go forward. I guess it's okay. Like it's fine. It's fine that this takes time. I shouldn't rush to make videos all the time, like especially if I'm trying to understand something. And fundamentally, I'm doing this to understand it, and also to help you guys understand it. But firstly, to help myself understand it, because I need to understand it if I want to help you guys understand it. There's a squirrel in the backyard. I'm wondering if I should let my dog go out and chase it. Oh, he's not super good with squirrels, because squirrels can get away easily. Anyways. Okay, the behavioral trajectory is driven by an internal goal, high F estimate, but the trajectory is not fully determined for two reasons. First, because of the stochasticity in the A loop, as discussed above. Second, the form of F est is not fixed, neither in evolution nor within the lifetime of an individual organism. Oh, what does that mean? Second, the form of F est of the estimate is not fixed. Oh, it changes. Yeah. It changes. Oh, yeah, it does change. And it does change with respect to your progeny as well, because your progeny, if you have a good F estimate and you can pass that on to your progeny, it's going to have a good F estimate and then modify its own F estimate. Interesting. Okay, so it's constantly changing. So it's modifying itself using stochastic factors. Because there we go, because it's modifying itself. Okay, this is because there are many different, let me just highlight this. It's not fixed. This is because there are many different forms of F estimate that are approximately equivalent in terms of how closely they can approximate the value of F true. There are many different forms of Fs that are approximately equivalent in terms of, in terms of how closely they can approximate the value of F true. Such different forms and their improvements are evolvable and learnable as well. They may be accessible through hereditary and behavioral variability, but also more deliberately through a dialogue between or within organisms. C'est très difficile. Je prends en français. The second form of estimate. Is it because there are many different forms of Fs that are approximately equivalent in terms of how closely they can approximate the value of F true? Such different forms and their improvements are evolvable and learnable as well. I guess I feel like the key here is self-modification. They may be accessible through hereditary and behavioral variability, but also more deliberately through a dialogue between or within organisms. But also more deliberately through a dialogue between or within organisms. Yeah, so you can just that just reminds me of like transferring fitness through language. Like you tell somebody like, hey, like if you're cold, you can wear a coat. And they're like, oh, okay. And that increases their own fitness and their own ability to modify their own behavior. I mean, I guess even the stochastic is not fully stochastic. It's randomness that like adjusts itself because it's just random, but then like you don't just stick with that random behavior. Like you keep trying new behaviors until one fits, and then it's that fitness, that estimate of fitness, that's causally responsible for increasing its own existence. Maybe that's a key as well, like the fact that it's like doing it for itself so that it continues to exist. It's bringing itself into existence and then modifying reality so that it can continue to exist. Cool. Okay. He then shifts to biosemiotics, which is about meaning making in biological systems. This is fun, but also tiring. Then he shifts to biosemiotics, which is about meaning in biological systems. There's a triad system for connecting an object to a sign to an interpretant. Yeah, this part I didn't focus too much on thinking. I mean, even this triad is pretty simple to understand. Like, you have a sign, like a thing, to represent an object. So the word cat represents the object cat, and an interpretant, which is, I guess, the process of turning the sign or making the sign correspond to the object, or like knowing that the sign corresponds to the object. And then here he makes an analogy between this, where a sign vehicle is connected to its semiotic object to an interpretant. The interpreter connects these, okay, which interprets the sign and produces the meaning of the triad. Tentative interpretation of the theory of figure 1D as a primordial semiotic triad, where the A loop interprets A as an estimate, interprets F estimate as an estimate of F true, resulting in enhanced fitness and the emergence of agency and meaning. Okay, so through the A loop, subject fitness is able to make meaning out of external fitness. And this A loop is what's able to drive the emergence of meaning. Okay, but if I put this in terms of my system, meaning itself is kind of like the entity that possesses free will. So what does that mean? Meaning itself is an emergent phenomenon, and which has downstream causal influence on reality? I guess so. I guess that's the way I'm putting it. It's kind of interesting. Okay, let's continue. The earlier mechanism is also like a triad. The subject-generated F estimate refers to the external F true through the meaning-generating A loop. The earlier mechanism is also like a triad. The subject-generated F estimate refers to the external F true. Through the meaning-generating A loop. The A loop implicitly interprets F estimate, and by doing so enhances the organism fitness. This loop is a primary source of meaning because of the dynamical and stochastic nature of the mechanism. It generates agency as well. It is dynamical, no? Yeah, it does have like a asymmetry because if fitness is high and subjective fitness matches fitness well, what's the point I'm trying to make? The loop is because it's stochastic. It's dynamical because once this F fitness reaches a certain threshold, randomness starts to increase. So the behavior of the system has now altered such that randomness is increased until fitness becomes a good estimate of external fitness again. And then it just it slows down and it keeps doing what it's doing. Yeah, okay. It's weird because you can see that these lower level systems are like the organism just doing what the organism does. And it's kind of just like systems that work causally and even randomly together. But then all of this together is giving rise to like this principle. And that principle itself becomes an emergent goal. It becomes causally connected to the fate of the organism. And so in and of itself may have the property of free will. That's great. That's excellent. That's exactly what I was looking for. A way to connect this principle to free will. Free will is an additional feature arising from this system, which has downward effects, and those downward effects occur through like a kind of almost just like a automated process. It's having control over that automated process, and it's like governing the flow of that automated process, but it's doing it through an automated process, which itself is like very fundamental and based on understandable rules. That's so cool. Okay. Okay. Let's continue. So, as argued elsewhere, the relationship between F estimate and F true can also be seen as the primordial form of intentionality, aboutness, the property of standing for or referencing something else. F est is about F true. Yeah, that's interesting. This is a primordial form of like a relationship between a model and an actual thing, because the model is mentally constructed and like a mental construct of the actual thing, and if that actual thing, if that estimate is high, it corresponds to being better for the organism reproductive wise. Let me grab a sip of water. How are you guys doing? If anybody wants to say anything, whether what I'm saying sounds crazy or interesting or nonsensical. I hope at least it makes sense to me, even if it doesn't make sense to other people. In a sense, the form of F estimate represents all the organism knows about its situation as objectively represented in the form of F true, which is similar to the concept of knowledge as discussed in Cull 2009. Yeah, so it's even a primordial form of knowledge. Mind blown, lol. Good, perfect. That's exactly how I feel about all of this. It's crazy. It's totally crazy. How all of this has been discovered recently, by the way. This paper itself is from 2015, which is very recent. But the paper earlier was from 2021 and 2020. So these are all brand new, 2021, yeah. These are all brand new insights into this field, which have been unbelievably cool to understand. Okay, where am I at? Was I on this one? No, I wasn't on this one yet. I was on... Yeah, as argued elsewhere. In a sense, the form F estimate represents all the organism... Yeah, okay, so that's just primordial knowledge. Sometimes the two latter factors, example, a harsh winter or a genetic disease, may determine biological outcomes without being caused by the organism's agency and goals. But usually biological outcomes also depend on and are partly caused by agency and goals. For example, when an animal deliberately migrates to a new territory, I can tell that this is my note. I think you should take an ER break. What's ER? Erectile dysfunction? Is that because to get erectile dysfunction or to cure it? Sorry, why did I open ChatGPT? I meant to open this. Wait, why did I say erectile? Erectile ring. Oh, Elden Ring. Oh man, maybe I should need a break if my brain for some reason thought that ER was erectile dysfunction. That's funny. It's funny how I can seem so smart while also being so stupid. I mean, Elden Ring would be fun to play, but I need more like the setup, and also like to figure out what I'm going to do in Elden Ring, because it's such a big game that like not everything I do in that game is fun. But maybe I'll take a break later to play Elden Ring, either on stream or not on stream. But yeah, if you guys want me to take a break, I can. I'm definitely going to be talking about this more and more streams, because I haven't even like done the main thing that I wanted to do, which is to help. It was to like write the script, maybe even collaboratively with you guys. It's also fun. Like it's just fun to know about this and study it because I took all these notes and like it was so fun going through them the first time, but then now that I'm actually processing it, it's becoming very interesting. But it's just revealing how complicated it is and how easily I can mess up explaining it and how easy it is to argue from a position of ignorance that I'm wrong. Because it's just so complicated to understand that you'll be like, what you're saying doesn't make sense when really it's actually just the complexity of it. It's just hard to understand, and so it can come off as not making much sense, when in reality it's perfectly consistent and logically consistent, and I would say consistent with the way the universe appears to us. Like it's clear that strong emergence does exist, like it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's what makes the universe so perplexing, and like how all of these different phenomenon can occur. Um, yeah, and just how like utterly incredible the universe is. It explains all that. It explains how all of that is possible, and it gives us a way to understand even further understandings. Okay, let's continue. So yeah, sometimes the latter two factors, example, a harsh winter or genetic disease, may determine biological outcomes without being caused by the organism's agency and goals. Yeah, so this is just kind of like predetermined, right? Like you didn't shoot, like there is predetermination within free will. In fact, both have to happen. Both, like predetermination is like a necessary causal factor for free will to exist. It's just like a lower level. It's just a lower level truth or a lower level principle. So like yeah, like a harsh weather or a genetic disease might cause you to die, but you can also exert some agency by changing your behavior. Biological outcomes also are partly caused by agencies and goals. For example, when an animal deliberately migrates to a new territory, you check your fitness. Your fitness is not good. Your ability to represent your fitness based on external things in your environment and your own internal understanding of yourself, that in and of itself can drive new behavior. And so it's partly responsible for it's just like a part of the organism's fitness. It's like a part of the organism's capacity to survive. Like part of its capacity is just given to it by, sorry, I just got an email. Well, I might have more work to do. Okay, where was I? Yeah, so the organism's ability to represent its environment and itself and its own fitness is another causal influence in the fate of the organism. So yeah, like on the one hand, it's being causally determined by its genetics that are predetermined. It's being influenced by external factors that it has no control over, but it's also being influenced by internal factors, namely the internal factor of control, of causal agency, determined or caused by this A loop up here. Okay, so let us continue. Okay, so although emergent phenomena arise from simpler ones, they subsequently displace the simpler phenomena as components that produce and explain higher levels. Very key point here. Although emergent phenomena arise from simpler ones, they subsequently displace the simpler phenomena as components that produce and explain higher levels. How do I even get to explaining how this works? It's downward influence, first of all. So like this higher level thing, for example, free will, is able to do things in a way that conflicts with the fundamental laws that gave rise to it in the first place. So imagine like the laws of physics, they give rise to consciousness, and then consciousness exists. And then this consciousness has this downward influence on matter and can cause matter to act in ways that matter doesn't ordinarily do, like or doesn't ordinarily spontaneously produce. For example, you can cause matter to smash into each other at very high velocities in superconductors. That's not something matter does of its own accord. That's something that a human with agency can cause matter to do. And so that kind of behavior is not just explainable from the laws itself, But there's a more fundamental kind of mathematical thing happening here. It's oh, sorry, I just got a comment. Let me read that. Okay, this is a scientific approach to this problem. The interplay of randomness and causality and the emergence of free will. If making a video is the same material dealt with in other traditions. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know to what extent this principle in general is dealt with in other traditions. It is like a very high level concept. Yeah, it's. I know, like this in particular is a very high level concept, so it's hard to see how other traditions could have come up with their own version of it. But it's not entirely impossible. Like it is possible. Like some things that I'm thinking about, like Kabbalah, and the Ein Sof, remind me a lot of what's possible here. I don't know, like Buddhism, like maybe Buddhism, but like it's a very it's hard to tell. I need to look into it more. German idealist philosophy. I mean, I can combine aspects of German idealist philosophy, specifically idealism and transcendental idealism. I gotta keep transcendental idealism in my back pocket for debates. Psychology. I'm going to show that it has application in psychology. Because it does have application in like every field. Because you got to think about it like this. So let's start with like the fundamental basics. That's physics. Okay, now let's go up a level. Chemistry. Okay, let's go up a level. Biology. Okay, one more level. Psychology, let's say. And then there's other levels and other fields and other like things. All of these are governed by by very specific rules that apply within those systems. Okay? Now, the kicker is that those rules are emergent from more fundamental rules, but many of them are strongly emergent. So they're strongly emergent in the sense that they are not predictable by those underlying rules. But when you add those rules into that new system, so biology, for example, biology is strongly emergent, as is pretty clear from what I've discussed so far. When you add those rules to biology, you can create a consistent biological or mathematical description of biology. It's just that it's now going to incorporate rules that are unpredictable from lower levels. Okay, so you just need to add in these new axioms, and then you can do biology. You can do mathematical computational biology. And it's those new rules which is really game changing, because it just means that like a new thing has come into existence that imposes some kind of restriction on the lower level rules, causing them to break, meaning that they can't give rise to that higher level rule. But this is how new things that exist in the universe can come into being. Because you create these new rules, and then now all of a sudden something like a human being can exist, because it's the rules that govern a human being and human consciousness and human sentience are these new rules that don't apply to just the fundamental particles. They're brand new rules, but it allows for brand new things like a human being. A human being is a unanticipated phenomenon within this universe, utterly so. But it's explainable if you can add new axioms onto your foundational system, which kind of replace those lower level rules. And this is what creates new possibilities. And in fact, if you restrict those possibilities, there's a paper that shows that if you take away strong emergence from evolution doesn't get very far, because everything that an organism can do is just kind of determined by smaller laws. It can't do anything novel because all that it does is determined by those laws. But if it can produce new laws via strong emergence, it can now do things that are completely novel and go in a completely different direction relative to, let's say, the predetermined fate governed by the arrangement of its parts. So yeah, that's how you got to think about this new field. It's like a thing that applies to everything. And so, yeah, I got to think about it. I got to think about whether I can incorporate some Buddhist philosophy or German idealist philosophy. Probably that to an extent, but maybe not in this particular video, but subsequently down the line. Psychology, yeah, definitely applicable there. Okay, so although emergent phenomena, I'll read this again because I like it so much. Although emergent phenomena arise from simpler ones, they subsequently displace the simpler phenomena as components that produce and explain higher levels. Gotcha. And then it says the second major problem for reduction is even more fundamental. Mathematical systems can only accurately represent the dynamics of deterministic systems. Stochastic phenomena can only be described in a roundabout probabilistic sense by using indirect constructs such as probability distributions. I wrote this thing twice, but yeah, this is just reiterating the fact that you can't use purely mathematical descriptions of fundamental physics to describe phenomena like this that are utilizing randomness in a novel way. So using math to predict this is really challenging. I wrote that for myself. The F estimate and stochasticity at a particular point in time depend on the history of F estimate and all previous stochastic outcomes, because the A loop entangles these factors and stores the result. The result is stored effectively permanent structural changes, memory. Oh man, that is mind blowing in and of itself. The A loop, and like it can't. Yeah, exactly. It can't. The F estimate already exists a priori within an organism if that organism belongs to a lineage of organisms that had F estimate and were continually modifying their F estimate. So F estimate already exists, and it's like increasing itself. It's like its existence is perpetuating itself. It's causing itself to exist, and causing itself to increase in its level of sophistication. Very interesting, though, how he says that the A loop entangles these factors and the result is stored effectively in permanent structural memory. Yeah, it's like using randomness and then storing that randomness in memory to be able to act on that randomness. I see that as very analogous to my dream metaphor, which is when you have dreams and those are kind of like random. So your brain is utilizing randomness, but every once in a while you might dream of something that's actually useful, and then you store it in memory and then you can act upon it. So a utilization of random processes is giving you the ability to do things that are novel. I gotta really like that. That example is really good. But like I have a sense that if I want to describe everything that I'm describing, it's going to take like an enormously, monstrously long video, which is fine. But there's a good question about. Sorry, I got an email and like it's making me think like I might have messed up a lot at work. But we'll get to it later. Okay, so entangles these factors and stores in memory. Hereditary and physiological process properties are retained over evolutionary time in the form of DNA and the cellular system of organelles, which are indeed partly traceable to initial storage billions of years ago. Very interesting. Similarly, development and learning establish memory that is often permanent within the lifetime of individual organisms. Unfading memory means that the A loop follows ever-changing, newly created trajectories through newly created parts of hereditary and behavioral space. Gotta read that again. Similarly, development and learning establish memory that is often permanent within the lifetime of individual organisms. I guess that just refers to like basic memory, basic neuronal memory being stored within the circuits of your neurons. Unfading memory means that the A loop follows ever-changing, newly created trajectories through newly created parts of hereditary and behavioral space. Consequently, it produces non-ergodic dynamics with future spaces undefinable in the present. Non-ergodic dynamics. Let me just Google that quickly. Non-ergodic. The average outcome for a group ensemble, i.e. representative organisms' minds, is not necessarily a reliable estimate of the average outcome for an individual over time. The average outcome for a group ensemble, i.e. representative organism minds, is not necessarily a reliable estimate of the average outcome for an individual over time. Okay. A further factor making complete mathematical description impossible is the complexity of the feedback loop and the factors involved. Particularly, Fs is presumably produced by physiology that directly or indirectly involves much, if not all, of the organism, because the functioning of the entire organism is the prime factor for its fitness. A further factor making complete mathematical description impossible is the complexity of the feedback loop and the factors involved. Okay. In particular, Fs is presumably produced by physiology that directly or indirectly involves much, if not all, of the organism, because the functioning of the entire organism is the prime factor for its fitness. That just reminds me of thinking of the organism as a holistic system. And a holistic system, scaled up, is itself an emergent phenomenon relative to the parts that compose it. And you should think of that whole system as a single entity, especially if you show that that single entity has causal efficacy, does have a causal influence on the trajectory of itself, or of the universe, in any capacity. From the above discussion, we have to conclude that the functioning of the A loop cannot be reduced, not even in principle, to its components and how they are configured. Very cool conclusion to reach, and very much shows that strong emergence is a thing, both theoretically and practically. Practically because the system is not, it pretty much describes evolution as it happens, or the evolution of behavior. And it's a very simple system for getting emergent behavior. It models evolution, and it models animal behavioral complexity from a very simple system. And the simple system is shown to be strongly emergent. Really incredible. So the new form of causation has emerged from a highly specific combination of purely physical causation as occurring in the A loop. But having emerged, it can no longer be described purely in physical terms. Okay, let's read that again. The new form of causation has emerged from the highly specific combination of purely physical causation as occurring in the A loop. But having emerged, it can no longer be described purely in physical terms. It depends on goal-directedness, meaning, and agency, which are phenomena that are not present in the physical world of non-living matter. As a result, changes in the world of life can only be understood from three rather than two basic forms of causation: deterministic, stochastic, and active semiotic. Having emerged, it can no longer be described in purely physical terms. It depends on goal-directedness, meaning, and agency, which are phenomena that are not present in the physical world of non-living matter. Yeah, meaning, especially meaning. Goal-directedness, the goal-directedness is itself emergent from F, because F itself is a goal, and you can show that F itself is increasing. F estimate, meaning for sure, because that's all about representation of the environment and how that increasing representation is a sign of increasing fitness. And agency. Where does agency come from? Agency comes from the A loop, deliberately causing this process which increases stochastic variables. So it deliberately does something to increase its randomness. That reminds me, if you take psychedelics to increase your brain's ability to randomly generate thoughts, it's you're taking influence of a deterministic factor. Sorry, you're taking. Hold on. My ability to speak is being diminished because I've been at this for 3 hours. Give me 1 second. I'm just gonna take a quick break. Okay. Where do we go from here? Yeah, so I think I'm understanding what this is all about. There's some things that are confusing me. Things like agency. Like, I gotta understand that better, how agency arises from the system. I mean, it does. I mean, like, you can tell it causally exists, but then the question is, like, what are the specific things that cause it to exist? Yeah, okay, which are phenomena that are not present in the physical world of non-living matter. Cool. Very cool that, like, you can show that non-physical things must exist just from this argument alone. As a result, changes in the world of life can only be understood from three rather than two basic forms of causation: deterministic, stochastic, and active semiotic. I guess the active semiotic is the combination of deterministic and stochastic. Okay. This paper we're gonna skip because it's related. Explains how non-locality can arise from locality, which is cool, but and it's related. It's like mathematically related to what we've been talking about, but it's just basically just like a different topic, in a way. Okay, active causation and the origin of meaning. This is another paper by this guy. This guy should consider himself lucky that I've read so many of his papers. I have a feeling, though, that this is just going to reiterate in a more complicated way things that we've already learned. Let's see when this paper was published. 2015. Man, that guy had a good year in 2015. Okay, let me quickly take a look at my... So I made some notes for this. It's a very computational system, if you noticed it before. Just thinking what to do from here. Should I continue this one or should I take a break? Because it has been 3 hours since I started this stream. Okay, I'll take a break and then I might come back later to continue talking about it. Okay, thanks for watching, my 4 viewers. Hope you enjoyed that. I will be back to talk about this some more, so if you're around then, you can check it out. What else should I say? Yeah, I guess I'll be discussing this or continuing this discussion from like a random place in the discussion. But that's fine. Like I'm noticing that a lot of these papers are nonlinear. Like, you don't need to know some of these more fundamental forms of emergence to understand these higher levels of emergence. And I'll explain them as much as I can and like obviously fill in gaps wherever I find them. This one was my favorite. This paper right here by George Ellis. I think his name is George Ellis. Was very, very fascinating. And it shows a clear case of strong emergence from semiconductors. And I'm very glad, looking forward to discussing that later on. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Peace out.